We going live here?
I believe we are live.
Oh, well, that's a shame. I wanted to get this out of the way first before we were live, just because it's a little bit scandalous here to have my milky thighs all up in the powerful milky thighs, though. Hey, boys.
I got to tell my mother-in-law to stop watching.
They're very sore. Oh, they're very sore. And so I've been doing this squat program at the gym, which just made me miserable. And what's been keeping me sane is this this rub right here, this balm from Green Paloma. Paloma Verde. Chico. Vamos entonces, Paloma Verde. Dale, güey. Hola. Yeah. Órale.
Is Carlos going to be your next?
Paloma Verde. Yeah. Well, I never heard him talk. I'm just doing my best generic, like, Mexican slangy stuff that I don't do real good. But yeah, I've been rubbing these on these strong ass milky thighs for a little bit here. I'll give you the other one. And let me tell you, you just rub it right on there, boys. And you can have a friend of yours. You can have another gentleman rub it on for you if it's in a hard to reach place. For me, pretty flexible, so I can reach everything I gotta reach. And yeah, it's been squatting every day, just every day, just squatting more and more weight, front squat, back squat, high rep, low rep, heavy, super heavy. And I just rub this right in to my powerful milky thighs that I'm sunning right now. And it keeps me going. It keeps me going. And if you want to rub this onto your strong thigh, probably not that strong, but your thighs anyway, go visit Paloma Verde and use promo code KING. And I believe Matthew knows what happens when you do that. I just know that you should do it. And line our fat pockets, eh, Matty boy?
Oh, yeah. We are just...
We're rolling in it.
PalomaVerdeStore.com and use promo code KING. That's PALOMAVERDE store.com and use promo code KING. That'll get you 25% off any order over $75. And apparently you guys like what we're offering here, because people have been showing up and they've been dropping fat stacks on some CBD products.
Oh, wait till after this sort of impromptu thing that we just did right here.
The good thing for them is that they are going to be compensated with exceptional value in return for said fat stacks, as Steven has demonstrated. Now, we can't guarantee you that you'll wind up with thighs like Steven, but you'll certainly wind up with thighs that feel as good as Steven's thighs do to Steven, right. Because I have no idea what Steven's thighs feel like. All I know is that Steven tells me that his thighs feel very good to him. So I'll let him say that.
You can go to my old high school and read in the inside of a few lockers about what my thighs feel like also, I'm sure. Yeah. Oh, football season.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I never played. The college that I went to didn't really have. So the high school I went to had no competitive sports whatsoever. It was this really conservative religious school. So like we were allowed to play capture the flag, but that was pushing it.
Flag. Okay.
Yeah, capture the flag. There's also smear the YouTube censored word.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, that was a fun one too, but we weren't allowed to call it that. I don't remember what we called it, but like when nobody was around, that's what we called it.
Infidel?
Yeah, smear the infidel. Smear the backslider. So the college I went to, though, it did have some professional sports, or not professional, did have some college sports, replicas of professional sports.
They probably looked like professional sports coming from a Christian conservative high school now.
Yeah. They had a college team. I remember one time their college basketball team played Gonzaga, and that was just the coolest thing. I think they lost like 173-50 or something like that.
Always fun though, too. Yeah.
Yeah, that was fun when that was happening. You're sitting there on ESPN, the old like 2009 ESPN app, like looking at it, and hey, I know that guy. I know the guy that scored. I know him. But
yeah, just getting posterized. Yeah.
Yep. Then we had flag football.
Oh, flag.
And
Okay.
that was fun. That was, like 7-man flag football. And it was in Eastern Washington. Eastern Washington during the summer is very hot. It's almost like desert. It's like the way you imagine weather to be in like Palm Springs. It's fairly similar there. But then in the winter, it's freaking cold as balls. So it gets down to 0 or below 0. So we would be playing flag football out there in like November, and it would be 25 degrees. And for people that have never played flag football, there's more contact in it than you might think. And having some guy run into you like full steam when it's 25 degrees outside is just not something to put on your bucket list. That's not fun at all. But I saw one of the gnarlier injuries I ever saw was actually in flag football. One of my teammates was diving. So there was a rule in the school that if you wore whatever pants that you wore while you were playing, they had to have no pockets. Or if they did have pockets, they had to be taped over. So one guy taped it over with some duct tape, but the duct tape had come loose and come off because it was old. And so this guy on my team, he dove for the flag and he got it, but his finger got caught in the pocket. And it was a spiral fracture all the way down, but his finger was like rotated and pointing backwards and bent to the side. I don't know how the bone wasn't visible, but held his hand up and his finger was pointing like the opposite direction. It was pretty gnarly.
Nope.
But anyways, that doesn't really have anything to do with what we're going to talk about today, but that makes for good BS talk as we're waiting for some people to get in here.
It certainly does. So does reading one of Tim Pool's headlines. Wait, no. Oh, the notification. Oh, no, the notification right here. Yes. New state of emergency declared over fear of BLM riot after shooting. Chauvin verdict did nothing. All caps. That's obviously in all caps. Yeah, I'm not going to do his first 2 minutes, but sometimes it's just, although I could, but it is fun to read the headlines sometimes of Tim Pool's videos.
I've said this in the show before that I had to unsubscribe from his show at one point because
you can just hear him yelling at you.
Yes, like my blood pressure spikes just seeing the title of the show.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen what his house looks like?
No.
He lives on a freaking compound. Like he lives on lots of acres, and he's got like full skate parks and stuff on his property.
He's a nasty skateboarder.
Like in a good way or a bad way?
No, he's really good.
He's really good? Huh, yeah.
Yeah.
I just don't know, scrolled past it on YouTube this weekend, and Amy was like, "Oh, she's kind of interested in it." So I started playing. She's like, "That's his house? That's where he lives?"
Yeah.
I'm sure it's probably got to be at least 8 bedrooms or larger. So because I'm sure a lot of his crew probably lives with him. They all have their own little
yeah. He has that guy that talks about how he lives in his driveway in an RV.
So
I knew he had some land or whatever, but I hadn't seen photos of it. I was always pretty curious.
Is that Ian, the guy that's like has like long hair and always talks about aliens and stuff?
Nah, I think it's the short-haired libertarian guy.
Oh, yeah.
I think
Luke Radkowski.
I believe so.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
I just put it together. Because I see that name on Twitter. That's him. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, Luke at We Are Change, I think is his
He's about as good. He's about as good as a libertarian could be, I would say.
Yeah.
He's got an extra flavor in there.
Yeah, he's got his money where his mouth is. He's got his We Are Change organization that's actually trying to accomplish something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, that's a reference to a conversation that Stephen and I were having off air about
in the supporting listeners group.
Yeah, in the supporting listeners group.
You guys really have to join that.
Yeah.
I mean, look, go find the link that Matthew gave you for Green Paloma Verde. Yes. And then and also, after you get your life situated with some CBD products, join the supporting listeners group. Why don't you?
Absolutely.
It's a lot.
There's so many great conversations there.
There's so many good ones.
Things were a little quiet over the weekend.
Over the weekend, they were quiet.
Yeah. Basically, half the group just went off the grid for the weekend, and so the conversation kind of died out for a little while, but it picked back up this morning.
Yeah, with a vengeance on Mondays usually. Yeah, half the group seems to get very depressed the second that Friday rolls around for whatever reason, and has for a couple decades. Yeah, so that's weird, but man, they oddly like the beginning of the week. Which is strange.
Yeah. It's just kind of reverse. That's kind of like the exact opposite of how most people are.
Of how you'd think.
That's how I tend to be too. Like the first of the week comes around and I'm usually like raring to go. I'm motivated. I'm amped up. By like Thursday, I'm like, oh God. Oh,
Yeah.
But yeah. I told Eastwood the other day, I said, I can't remember the lead into the joke, so it just isn't going to be as nearly as funny as it could have been. But I said something about how most people think that Monday is the worst day of the week, and that's because they're weak and nobody shall remember their name. I want to train my young man to attack the weak with a vengeance, and then he can persist through the whole week, unlike his father. Okay. So you guys, if you guys have, this is the first time you're watching, because we've got the extra clickbaity title. We've got Moldbug's name. We've got Mises in there. We've got Carlyle. So this is the type of show. Part of the reason that we're doing this, just so you guys know, is because it's great content and we can really stand behind it, and it gives you guys a good idea of where we're coming from. But also because people are not very likely to search YouTube for King Pilled, although you're certainly welcome to.
Not yet.
But it's King Pilled, all one word, KINGPILLED, King Pilled. You can go search that and kind of get the SEO jamming. But the people are very likely, I mean, again, we're speaking in gradations here. It's relatively. People are very likely to Google Moldbug or Carlyle. And if they were to Google those or search on YouTube for those terms, then I want to make sure that our video is one of the first ones that comes up. So doing this type of video, while it's great content for you guys really enjoy it, as everyone's been telling me, and we enjoy it because Steven has strong feelings about Carlyle, particularly given the content of today's chapter, which is the last chapter in the series. You guys are gonna have fun with this one, and it's gonna be very interesting to read this and try to keep our YouTube channel. So the so this works for everybody. This works for everybody except for Susan Wojcicki or whatever her name is, the YouTube CEO. This content does not work for her. But fortunately, we are nobodies on YouTube in the relative scheme of things, so nobody's paying attention to us, so we can get away with more stuff.
And you mentioned in the relative scheme of things, I was just thinking in the absolute scheme of things, it is refreshing dealing with such a small subculture that just like, yeah, in an absolute sense, we are really a margin of error away from being as well known as Curtis Yarvin in an absolute sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah, really.
That's comforting.
Yeah, that's true. That's very, very strange to think about. And I mean, that's saying more about Curtis Yarvin than it is about us. But
zoom out.
But here's the great thing is that one thing, as you become king-pilled, as you understand the nature of how information moves through a society and how societies organize themselves, you'll realize that the people who change the world, the people who really move the world, are not the most famous people necessarily. And your organization, your movement, your whatever sort of thing you're trying to weaponize, or not weaponize, but to utilize to move the world in the direction you want to move it, it doesn't have to be the biggest in the world. It doesn't have to be gigantic. You don't have to win popular support of everyone, especially not at first. The societies are always moved around, are always moved around the most intolerant minorities, the minority group that plants itself and says, nope, I'm not going anywhere. You can't move me beyond this point. How many people in the United States as a percentage eat kosher? It's a very, very small percentage of people. However, every single product that you find out in the market that is kosher will say that it's kosher, because people who eat kosher will not eat not kosher. But people who eat not kosher, they'll eat kosher, they don't care. So if you want to get the people that eat kosher, then your stuff is going to have to be labeled that it's kosher. Otherwise, they're not going to eat it, and you'll never see them. So they're a small minority, a small percentage of the group. And I can hear the jokes coming, but we'll leave that aside for the time being. The people who eat kosher make the rest of the world build around them and move around them, and and you can apply this with any other example as well. There's plenty of the whole
any other example.
the whole Church of Woke. The whole Church of Woke, which has nothing whatsoever to do with kosher. There is nothing that connects the Church of Woke to kosher food in any sense whatsoever. 100%. How can I reemphasize this? I don't believe that there's any connection between them whatsoever. Not on any corner of the planet do I believe there's any connection between the Church of Woke and the people who eat kosher. So the Church of Woke is a very small subset of people. It's tiny. The people who govern the world, it's a very small subset of people. But they move the rest of the world because they've figured out how to engineer their approach to the world to ensure that everyone else has to build around them, and they've protected what's theirs. So there's a really great piece on this by Nassim Taleb. If you look up his piece on I think it's the intolerant individual or the intolerance of minorities or something like that. Probably not the intolerance of minorities. That's a good way to get bad traffic. But I think it's the intolerance of the individual. And so he goes into that. He breaks down why it is that it's always the small groups that change the world. So that's a long way to say that just because we're small doesn't mean that we don't have high expectations for our content and what we're trying to accomplish here. So that means that we count a lot on you guys who are listening. You guys have to join us in this. You guys have to spread this message, and you guys have to do your part if you believe in what we're saying to apply it in your own life, whatever that comes to mean. And we've got some ideas about what that should mean, but we'll get into those later.
That's right.
Anyways,
so we want you guys to convene and rub each other with Paloma Verde Muscle Rub, premium THC-free CBD salve stick.
Convene and rub your thighs with Green Paloma, and shout King, and then that'll get it done. This is funny. On the other show that I do, Wealth, Power, and Influence, we did an episode. By the way, we did a really good episode this morning. You should go check it out. We talked about grifting and the ethics of grifting, and whether grifting is inherently good or bad, and what it means, and if you're going to grift, how you should do it, and that sort of thing. So it was a very interesting conversation. I enjoyed it a lot. We talked about apparently Edward Snowden over the last couple of days agreed to show up at this guy's conference or seminar or summit or whatever, where he's trying to get people to pay $47 to join his VIP real estate deal. And Edward Snowden was supposed to be their I don't know what you call it, the main event, the guy who comes in to he attracts a bunch of eyeballs, and he comes and he shares his thoughts on wealth or whatever. He showed up and he aired the guy's dirty laundry and said, "Is this you?" And he posted an article of the guy being accused of engaging in a $4.4 million real estate scam, bond scam, or something like that, and said, "I'm not comfortable with what you guys are doing here," and peaced out live. And so the guys had to kind of scramble and recover it. So it was a very, very interesting subject that we used as a lead-in, and we had a pretty interesting conversation. So go check that out, Wealth, Power, and Influence with Jason Stapleton. Yours truly is the co-host over there. Anyways, last thing, please subscribe, share the show, like this episode, share it if you would, especially live, especially while we're doing this live. It's because I'm very interested to hear people's reactions the first time that they hear Carlyle and the first time they hear Moldbug talking about Carlyle, because I'm very interested to see people's reactions. So if you can, while you're listening right now, it says we got 9 people watching live. Go out, share this, try to get it in front of some other people, and see if we can get some more people in here live, so we can get some live reactions. And then if you're watching this after the fact, months, years, millennia down the road, and you're listening to the audio version of this show, then also please subscribe to us on YouTube or on iTunes or whatever, Spotify, whatever platform that you use for your podcasts, and then give us a 5-star rating and a review as well, a positive review, and let people know that you enjoy what we're doing here. Okay, I think that's all the housekeeping. We're almost 20 minutes in. Before we get into the Carlyle reading, real quick, I wanted to run through this thread that I just saw on Twitter as I was getting ready for the show. And I don't know who this person is. I don't even follow them. I just came across them because someone I was looking at had retweeted something that they said. So they're at RISC_MC. And they've got an anime picture and some sort of hieroglyphics as their name. So if you want to go follow them, go ahead. I want to make sure I credit them since they're the one who put this great thread out. Actually, here, I'll retweet it right now. So you can go follow me at RealKingPilled, and you can see the tweet. So it says left wing equals equality. Right wing equals hierarchy, which is something I've said here before. We both believe that here on this show, that's the fundamental distinction. It says this is the only view of the political spectrum which makes sense. Viewed this way, the link between open borders immigration and socialized medicine is obvious. Open borders is equality between resident and foreigner. Socialized medicine is equally bad access to healthcare. National Socialism, or NatSoc, is right-wing despite its socialism because of its hard emphasis on racial hierarchy. libertarianism is right-wing despite being gay because of its insistence on accepting the hierarchies which result from laissez-faire markets and freedom of association.
Really took me by surprise. I wasn't ready for that.
Yeah.
I was listening to you tap dance for 20 minutes around kosher, and then just whammo. Everything that I've wanted to say for 6 months. Just there. Okay.
I was gonna try to make it through that whole thing with a straight face, but I couldn't.
How could anyone?
Okay, continuing. So
I mean, you should go back a line or two to give people context.
right, okay. So
give it some.
So once again, National Socialism is right-wing despite its socialism because of its hard emphasis on racial hierarchy. I don't know if National Socialism always inherently includes racial hierarchy. I know traditionally it has, but I haven't studied National Socialism itself enough to understand if that's an integral part of someone who is a nationalist socialist. I guess it's been so tarred with it that it would have to be. But either way, it's right wing because there's an emphasis on a hierarchical aspect. And again, this comes down to their rhetoric, what they're talking about, what they champion, what they claim to advocate. And I would agree that National Socialism is right wing, but it's a right wing, left wing ideology. So ultimately, your political spectrum has to be zoomed out a lot more. And once it's zoomed out a lot more, then you'll see, democracy is way over here on the left, and so National Socialism is a right-wing form of democracy, but democracy being as left-wing as it is, it's a right-wing form of left-wing thing. So it's just slightly to the right of something even further to the left. And he's going to get into a really interesting analogy here. So libertarianism is right-wing despite being gay because of its insistence on accepting the hierarchies which result from laissez-faire markets and freedom of association. As can be seen from these two examples, there is no coherent right-wing as a whole. There are many right wings because there are many mutually exclusive hierarchies that are esteemed by various right-wingers. By contrast, the various flavors of leftism differ mostly in emphasis, which types of equality are most important, race, sex, economic, etc., and on tactics. Behind those disagreements is a shared vision. The left is inherently more cohesive than the right. If you have n pennies that you are dividing among m jars, where n modulus m is 0, there is exactly one configuration where all the jars have an equal number of pennies, but countless unequal configurations. The right-left political spectrum is a sphere, not a line. At the center is the left singularity. The closer you get to it, the more left-wing. Right-wing is away from the center in any direction. The above discussion is about left-right in the abstract. Practical politics can muddy these categorizations. For example, left-wing ideology is often just an excuse to plunder. As such, it's common for leftist policies to be driven more by greed than egalitarianism. And I would say, and I know that Popular Liberty in the chat here, I know that he would agree that that left-wing ideology is fundamentally an excuse to plunder. That's how it always manifests. It always manifests as the people who want to plunder giving themselves a veneer of legitimacy. But in reality, it's just people who want to plunder, and they're coming up with an excuse to do so. Because ultimately, politics being on the continuum with war and being functionally the same thing, the people who would have made war in the past are the people who would lean toward a left-wing ideology. If you zoom out or fast forward, or not fast forward, but rewind, one of these things, if you rewind a few hundred years back before democratic politics, then the people who would have now today joined a left-wing movement back then would have been the ones who would have been most likely to go engage in piracy or some other sort of plundering mechanism. Today, we've just given them a political outlet. And I guess you could say that might be better in some senses. It's better in the sense that if people are engaging in the political process, they're not going out and actually physically killing people. It's worse in the sense that they still have the same effect as the people who are just out killing people. They're just depersonalized from it. So they're not the ones actually engaging in the practices themselves. They're just outsourcing it to someone else. And so that makes it much harder to actually identify as, hey, this is fucked up. These people doing this is fundamentally antisocial, corrupt, totalitarian behavior, but they've been able to hide it behind some sort of a veneer of legitimacy. So every time that you, as a libertarian or a constitutional conservative or whatever you are, every time that you give any sort of legitimacy to the idea that this is just an equal debate where we're just engaging in the marketplace of ideas, and you bring your ideas to the forefront, and we'll bring ours, and we'll hash them out, and we'll come up to some sort of agree to disagree somewhere and just try to get along. Anytime you engage in that process with people like this, you're just legitimizing their corruption. You're legitimizing and helping them to legitimize their naked greed and corruption. So if you think that this is a process where you can just have a nice conversation and you can debate with people, I mean, these people, I tweeted something the other day. I said that the most radical activists in the world, the most radical and aggressive activists in the world have declared open warfare on the rest of us. They're with the racial rhetoric, with environmental rhetoric, with economic rhetoric. All their rhetoric has all been an open declaration of warfare on everyone else, that they will not let anyone rest. They will not subside until they get their way. They're going to use whatever's at their disposal, whatever they can get away with, until they get their way. And if you engage them in good faith, not only are you a sucker, but you're actually facilitating their plunder, because you're treating them with a decency that they don't merit, that they don't deserve, and you're the one making them decent, not them. They should be treated like they're just as corrupt and criminal as they actually are. They should be treated with contempt. They should not be given the benefit of the doubt. They should not be treated in good faith. They should be treated according to their actual rules, the actual rules that they play by. They should be held to those rules. That's not hypocrisy. That's smart tactics. Because, again, this is warfare. This is what warfare looks like. I don't know what it is, 5th, 10th, 50,000th generation warfare is information warfare. And rhetoric is a big part of that. So that's one thing that we want people to realize through this idea of becoming king-pilled, is recognizing the true nature of politics, which is that it's warfare, and you have to engage with it as if it's a war, which means either don't get involved and keep out of it as to every degree that you can, which would include commentary. If you're posting on Facebook, if you're on Twitter, if you're getting into arguments with people, you're engaging in politics. You're just engaging with politics in a bad way. So if you if you recognize that it's warfare and you're going to engage with it, then you need to engage with it in a smart way. And one of those is not just going and picking fights with people, because you wouldn't go just randomly pick fights with people unless you were ready, especially if you're not ready to actually fight with them. If you're going to pick a fight but then claim you're not there to fight because you're like, oh, non-aggression principle, then you're just a hypocrite and an idiot. So if you recognize that it's warfare, you need to engage as if it's warfare, which means, one, treating it like it's warfare and using smart tactics in your engagement with the warfare, or withdrawing from it altogether and having nothing to do with it and trying to build around it completely, staying out of the playing field altogether. Or the final option is just surrender and join the other side. That's completely at your an option that's at your disposal as well. So those are your three options.
If anyone has any a how-to on how to do that, if you can let me know. I was just begging for that over the summer. And I'm still open to it. How to surrender, join the other side? Yeah. Like the guy from The Matrix that everyone was calling me. And I was just I viewed it as the highest compliment. I was like, didn't he get a steak? He got a steak, didn't he? I didn't watch the movie.
Carlos says, what kind of tactics set up the field for victory? That's part of, to one degree, that's not something that you talk about publicly, just because the nature of it. But that's part of the reason why we started this show, was to explore that territory. From that understanding, how do we begin to behave in a way that we attain this level of using smart tactics? How do we learn what these tactics are, and how do we begin to employ them? How do we sharpen our own swords, so to speak? Again, one of the best ways is to avoid violence and avoid violent rhetoric altogether, and not, one of the worst things that you could do is be constantly posting your gun collection online and Mullen Labe, all that kind of thing. No, that's a pretty bad tactic. That's a good tactic if you're willing, when they show up at your front door, if you're willing to go out in a hail of gunfire, then I guess maybe that's consistent there. But 100% of you goofballs out there posting your gun collection, you're not willing to go out in a hail of gunfire. You'll talk up a big game, but when they actually show up, you're going to go peacefully. So stop talking a big game and talk a game that corresponds with your actual endowment. Be consistent in the way that you approach this, and If you're not willing to go 100% the way that you're talking like you will, then stop talking like you would. Were you going to say something?
We started well, I got distracted because your wife and my mother, I believe, were saying that me rubbing my thighs was awkward, which I think that's open to interpretation at the very least. But we started, we're using the podcasting system to tell people that they need to stop using the podcasting system. I think. I mean, I kind of really did like from moment one of like lockdown, I was just like, I want to start a podcast to tell everybody they need to stop listening to podcasts. that was an actual thought I had, because I was just like, this isn't, guys, this isn't doing anything. It's not doing anything good anyway.
This is obviously a reference to oh yeah, they do think that you're, huh?
I reference
yeah,
to what?
You weren't referencing anything. There was nothing to reference there. Mm-hmm. The if part of your actual message is we are going to use this platform to tell people that they shouldn't use this platform, I know that there's people that like, I think that they're like, oh yeah, of course it's a contradiction, but we actually mean it. We're just using this to get your attention. It's like, well,
I mean it.
I'm just completely at a loss.
I would just like to tell you, this is just a PSA for me. But like, if we ever somehow, and I don't think this is very likely, if we ever have, maybe it is likely, if we have Dave on, this is God right here, driving a train, I'm gonna roll over on you so hard. I'm gonna be like, I don't know what's wrong with Matthew. I've always been a big fan of it.
Yeah, I'm expecting that. Okay. All right, so we need to get started on this here, because this is going to be a long read, and we're already almost half an hour in. So, okay, I'm just going to start. So this is Moldbug on Carlyle, Chapter 3, Carlyle in the 20th Century, Fascism and Socialism, by Mencius Moldbug, July 23, 2009. I promise that will not turn into the Carlyle channel, all Carlyle all the time. We also promise you that King Pilled is not going to turn into the Carlyle channel as well.
I don't co-sign that. I'm leaving it very open. And let me tell you today, if you're gonna, let's say this, and I'll let you get started. You know, if some people who were part of a Facebook group that is now completely defunct, could really be sold on Carlyle with this particular chapter. Although I think they would be slightly misinterpreting it in a way that they would want to misinterpret it. And it'll become clear once I let Matthew get there. But yeah, there's that alt-right pipeline that people like to talk about. If ever you had anybody who was alt-right pipeline-y, this might not be a bad thing to let them read. Yeah. That's all.
If you want to encourage them down the pipeline.
Right.
Part of the reason that's part of the reason that we're taking this on is because I don't think this should necessarily take you down the alt-right pipeline, and I want to present a view of the world where you can consume this content and you can appreciate it and you can recognize its truth, but not draw the natural conclusion that a lot of people do. Because I don't think that was the conclusion that Carlyle meant for people to draw, and I know that it's not the conclusion that Moldbug would want you to draw. That's not why he's sharing it. So, yeah. Okay.
You'll see.
Yes. However, we have yet to seriously examine Carlyle's track record as a prophet. The true force of the mad sage emerges only when we compare his future to our past and our present. If Carlyle's predictions are significantly more accurate than those of his more conventional peers, his reputation as a true prophet and general Sith Lord is confirmed. If not, he is just another crazy homeless person in the library. What we'd really like is Carlyle's own history of the 20th century. Perhaps Rick Darby can help us out with his Ouija board. Rick Darby, apparently it's a blog that somebody used, reflight.blogspot. It doesn't work anymore. Until this channel opens, however, we are stuck with Google Books. Question: does anyone at the Googleplex know they're serving The Occasional Discourse, which is one of his books? Does anyone at the SPLC read Unqualified Reservations? If so, wouldn't suing Google generate fantastic press? And say, how's it coming with that diversity effort? And he linked to diversity.google. Fortunately, it is not too hard to retrospectively construct a Carlylean interpretation of the 20th century. And for those who disagree, there is you are. I would not be surprised if I'm the only human being who read Carlyle's Frederick the Great this year. Just tilt your head and slip the mollusk in your ear, which is a reference to Wrath of Khan. Carlyle can be quickly identified as a predictor of unusual accuracy by two major correct predictions about the 20th century. One, the 20th would be a century of democracy in which the political center moved consistently to the left, and two, it would be a century of murder, misery, tyranny, and anarchy, quote, enormous megatherions, ugly as were ever born of mud. The first prediction was pretty standard. The second was quite unusual. Their combination is distinctively Carlylean, and more broadly, Victorian and British. You will certainly have a hard time finding anyone outside these categories, except a grumpy old mugwump or two, who believes in both these predictions. They are clearly correct, and they were on paper by 1850, and he references the Latter-day Pamphlets, which he wrote in 1850. But why paraphrase? Why not go direct? For I am to Carlyle as Saruman to Morgoth. Enter the true palace of darkness. Join in my iron oath to the master. And now he's quoting Carlyle. Or perhaps democracy, which we announce as now come, will itself manage it? Democracy, once modeled into suffrages furnished with ballot boxes and such like, will itself accomplish the salutary universal change from delusive to real, and make a new blessed world of us by and by? To the great mass of men, I am aware, the matter presents itself quite on this hopeful side. Democracy they consider to be a kind of government. The old model, formed long since and brought to perfection in England now 200 years ago, has proclaimed itself to all nations as the new healing for every woe. Set up a parliament, the nations everywhere say when the old king is detected to be a sham king and hunted out or not. Set up a parliament, let us have suffrages, universal suffrages, and all either at once or by due degrees will be right, and a real millennium will come. Such is their way of construing the matter. Such, alas, is by no means my way of construing the matter. If it were, I should have had the happiness of remaining silent, and been without call to speak here. It is because the contrary of all this is deeply manifest to me, and appears to be forgotten by multitudes of my contemporaries, that I have had to undertake addressing a word to them. The contrary of all this, and the farther I look into the roots of all this, the more hateful, ruinous, and dismal does the state of mind all this could have originated in appear to me. To examine this recipe of a parliament, how fit it is for governing nations, nay, how fit it may now be in these new times for governing England itself, where we are used to it so long, this too is an alarming inquiry, to which all thinking men and good citizens of their country, who have an ear for the small still voices and eternal intimations, across the temporary clamors and loud blaring proclamations, are now solemnly invited. Invited by the rigorous act itself, which will one day, and that perhaps soon, demand practical decision or redecision of it from us, with enormous penalty if we decide it wrong. I think we shall all have to consider this question one day, better perhaps now than later, when the leisure may be less. If a parliament with suffrages and universal, or any conceivable kind of suffrages, is the method, then certainly let us set about discovering the kind of suffrages, and rest no moment till we have got them. But it is possible a parliament may not be the method. Possible the inveterate notions of the English people may have settled it as the method, and the everlasting laws of nature may have settled it as not the method. Not the whole method, nor the method at all, if taken as the whole. If a parliament with never such suffrages is not the method settled by this latter authority, then it will urgently behoove us to become aware of that fact and to quit such method. We may depend upon it, however unanimous we be, every step taken in that direction will, by the eternal law of things, be a step from improvement, not towards it. Basically what he's saying in not so many words is that everyone's moving in this direction, but how do we know that it's good? We haven't even settled who all is going to be involved in voting. How do we know that this is going to work? It could be that everyone agrees that this is the best thing to do, and everyone is wrong, and it's completely different from the actual laws of nature. This is the formal and informal meanings of politics. This may be our formal justification for doing it, or our formal goal with it, but if what actually accomplishes is this, we need to pay attention to what's actually happening, not what we're intending to have. And so toward the end there of this part of the quote, he said that no matter how unanimous we may depend upon this being the method, every step taken in that direction will, by the eternal law of things, be a step away from improvement and not a step towards it. And here he's talking about parliament. So he's talking about almost like a republicanism kind of. And that's how he's treating this. Today, people who advocate for parliament or a parliamentary style system are much more like tend to be very right wing. That's how farther to the left that we've gone, to where this guy here was the right winger of his age, and he's like, a parliament, and today the right winger is like, a parliament. Anyways, back to Carlyle, or back to Moldbug quoting Carlyle. Not towards it, I say, if so. Unanimity of voting. That will be nothing for us, if so. Your ship cannot double Cape Horn by its excellent plans of voting. The ship may vote this and that above decks and below in the most harmonious, exquisitely constitutional manner. The ship, to get round Cape Horn, will find a set of conditions already voted for and fixed with adamantine rigor by the ancient elemental powers, who are entirely careless how you vote. If you can, by voting or without voting, ascertain these conditions and valiantly conform to them, you will get round the Cape. If you cannot, the ruffian winds will blow you ever back again. The inexorable icebergs, dumb privy councillors from chaos, will nudge you with most chaotic admonition. You will be flung half frozen on the Patagonian cliffs, or admonished into shivers by your iceberg councillors, and sent sheer down to Davy Jones, and will never get round Cape Horn at all. Unanimity on board ship. Yes, indeed, the ship's crew may be very unanimous, which doubtless for the time being will be very comfortable to the ship's crew, and to their phantasm captain if they have one. But if the tack they unanimously steer upon is guiding them into the belly of the abyss, it will not profit them much. Ships, accordingly, do not use the ballot box at all, and they reject the phantasm species of captains. One wishes much some other entities, since all entities lie under the same rigorous set of laws, could be brought to show as much wisdom and sense at least of self-preservation, the first command of nature. Phantasm captains with unanimous votings. This is considered to be all the law and all the prophets at present. If a man could shake out of his mind the universal noise of political doctors in this generation, and in the last generation or two, and consider the matter face to face, with his own sincere intelligence looking at it, I venture to say he would find this a very extraordinary method of navigating, whether in the Straits of Magellan or the undiscovered Sea of Time. To prosper in this world, to gain felicity, victory, and improvement, either for a man or a nation, there is but one thing requisite, that the man or nation can discern what the true regulations of the universe are in regard to him and his pursuit, and can faithfully and steadfastly follow these. These will lead him to victory, whoever it may be that sets him in the way of these, were it Russian autocrat, Chartist parliament, Grand Lama, force of public opinion, Archbishop of Canterbury, Macrowdy the seraphic doctor with his last evangel of political economy, sets him in the sure way to please the author of this universe and is his friend of friends. And again, whoever does the contrary is, for a like reason, his enemy of enemies. This may be taken as fixed. And now, by what method ascertain the monition of the gods in regard to our affairs? How decipher with best fidelity the eternal regulation of the universe? And read from amid such confused embroilments of human clamor and folly what the real divine message to us is. A divine message or eternal regulation of the universe there verily is in regard to every conceivable procedure and affair of man. Faithfully following this, said procedure or affair will prosper and have the whole universe to second it and carry it across the fluctuating contradictions towards a victorious goal. Not following this, mistaking it, disregarding this, destruction and wreck are certain for every affair. How find it? All the world answers me, count heads. Ask universal suffrage by the ballot boxes, and that will tell. Universal suffrage? Ballot boxes? Count of heads? Well, I perceive we have got into strange spiritual latitudes indeed. Within the last half century or so, either the universe or else the heads of men must have altered very much. Half a century ago, and down from Father Adam's time till then, the universe, wherever I could hear tell of it, was wont to be of somewhat abstruse nature, by no means carrying its secret written on its face legible to every passerby. On the contrary, obstinately hiding its secret from all foolish, slavish, wicked, insincere persons, and partially disclosing it to the wise and noble-minded alone, whose number was not the majority in my time. End quote. Latter-day Pamphlets, The Present Time, pages 18 to 22. I love just his writing style is just the most glorious thing that has ever shown its face upon this earth. I absolutely love it. Okay, you guys are jamming on the comments here. All right, let me get back to it.
Did he call it or what?
What's that?
I was just saying, did he call it or what?
Oh yeah, it's just and in the most exquisite method possible. That's the best argument against democracy that you'll ever hear, and he put it down in 4 pages. Just absolutely phenomenal. All right, back to Moldbug. Let me get a drink first.
Get a drink. I wonder if there's any CBD water. That would be an interesting one for Carlyle.
There's
No shit.
THC water. Yeah, I can get some at the local dispensary here.
Oh, okay. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, I would prefer people go through our sponsor, Matthew, but I suppose it's just me.
Oh no, I don't know. Actually, that'd be a good question. Carlos, do you have CBD water? I don't think I saw any on the website. If you did, I would definitely buy it. Okay, back to Moldbug. Of course, this pair of predictions is just an example. Hindsight can easily identify correct predictions in the corpus of any essayist. We cannot consider Carlyle's actual accuracy in retrospect without counting all of his correct and incorrect predictions, then comparing to those of a contemporary peer. Perhaps this could be a useful exercise for some anomic beaver with a spreadsheet. We can produce a more interesting effect on the modern mind, however, by presenting ways in which Carlyle understands the 20th century better in the 1850s than almost anyone in 2009. Specifically, we can employ Carlyle to teach you about the 20th century, and if not you, your uninitiated friends. Only one simple demonstration is required. You see, for Carlyle, the pair of prophecies described earlier, the rise of democracy in the 20th century and the extraordinary level of political murder in the 20th century, are not independent predictions. They are causally connected. The rise of democracy is the cause of the Holocaust, etc. While this proposition seems self-evident to Carlyle, pretty much no one believes it today. Will historians eventually conclude that he was right? If so, Carlyle beats them by 150 years, and counting. Counting for a while yet, I suspect. To the Democrat, of course, nothing could be further from the truth. Rather, democracy appears as the cure for the 20th century's political ills. A cure born in serendipitous synchrony to its disease, like the monitor for the Merrimack. It reaches the scene of the crime just in time to try to save the victims. Succeeding for most, sadly failing for some. So you may see some blood on its hands or clothing. If this alibi were not interesting enough, any exculpation of democracy leaves the tragedies of the 20th century uncaused. If the narrators of democratic history were more confident that these events were indeed causeless, random, and without pattern, they might be less addicted to the passive voice. Instead, you see it every day in the papers. 3 people were killed today in... Or, even better, the false active. Today, violence killed 3 people in... Indeed. Thus, in the 20th century, which was also the century of democracy, violence killed hundreds of millions of people. Of course, neither Carlyle nor I can deny that North America and Europe in 2009 enjoy local peace, at least in the conventional military sense. Recent political violence in these areas has been minimal. But any hegemonic conqueror can and typically does suppress political violence, democracy, or Genghis Khan. This does not help us assess the net total of political violence in a counterfactual universe in which democracy, or Genghis Khan, had decided to mind their own business. Surely the easiest argument against Carlyle's hypothesis is that most of the atrocities by the 20th century were committed not by democracy, but by its enemies, totalitarian states of both the right and left. Again, democracy is at the scene of the crime only in its capacity as an officer of the peace. It is not just the blood of the victims which appears on its hands and clothing, but also that of the real killers. Again, perfectly true. It is possible to construct a definition of an orthodox democracy, and possible to show that orthodox democracies have by far the cleanest hands in the 20th century military mass murders. Under 21st century principles of human rights, for instance, we see only 1 million or so civilians incinerated by urban firebombing. A peccadillo for the age. Sure. But clean hands do not exclude causality. The fascist and socialist totalitarian states of the 20th century, Hitler, Mao, and Stalin, basically, existed as exceptions, throwbacks, in the age of rising democracy. Hitler, Mao, and Stalin committed the crimes of Hitler, Mao, and Stalin, making them the proximate causes of these events. We still may ask, what caused Hitler, Mao, and Stalin? What was the origin and nature of these regimes? If we find the fingerprints of democracy behind them, we may continue to suspect it as the ultimate cause. The argument that democracy caused Hitler, etc., may seem an unusual and abstruse one. In the democratic narrative of the 20th century, indeed, it makes very little sense. In the Carlylean narrative, it is almost so obvious as to be unworthy of mention, as we'll see. The Carlylean explanation of Hitler, Stalin, and Mao is that fascism and communism are both, each in a very different way, democratic phenomena. They existed in the century of democracy because they could not have existed without it. We will make this argument at length later. It is a subtle point to explain, however. It is easily suspected of sophistry, or, as Carlyle would put it, Jesuitism. An introduction to Carlyle's 20th century can only start with a much less subtle blow to the head. To demonstrate how easy it is to retell history without changing any of the facts, Let us supply a Carlylean reinterpretation of the events by which democracy gained its hegemony, the wars of 1939 to 1945. The result will attribute ultimate causality for the Holocaust to the democratic movement in general and the Roosevelt administration in specific. First, we must remove the existing cloak of hagiography. Beating the Nazis, a feat in which my own grandfather participated quite enthusiastically, is perhaps the main moral claim to fame of our present democratic overlords. The moral logic is simple. Hitler committed the Holocaust was evil, FDR fought Hitler and beat him, so FDR must be good. A saint may fight against a knave. Alternatively, two knaves may fight. A dragon may be slain by St. George or by another dragon. In the former case, you are left with St. George, who deserves a reward for slaying his dragon. In the latter case, you are faced with a dragon which did only what dragons do. He was probably the bigger of the two, and now he is even bigger than that. Unfortunately, there is no moral system on earth which assigns any points for either A, the unintended consequences of one's actions, especially when B, these consequences do not actually happen. So, if A, America's war had been undertaken, either by its leaders or its masses, with the intention of saving the Jews from Hitler, and B, any significant number of Jews had been actually saved by this policy, credit on this count would most certainly be due, and we would see what we want to see, St. George slaying the dragon. But I'm not aware of any historical school which espouses either of these propositions, neither of which has had any relationship to reality. In reality, the American authorities were only slightly less eager than their German counterparts to conceal the Holocaust. And he links to the book Buried by the Times, The Holocaust in America's Most Important Newspaper by Laurel Leff. As any bail bondsman can tell you, this is called being an accessory. Not good. As for saving Jews, all contemporary claims that America was fighting a war for the Jews emanate from Berlin, not Washington. Goebbels was known to tell the truth on occasion, but not this occasion. So in other words, it was Berlin they were saying that we're fighting this war against the Jews, and the Americans are getting involved in it to save the Jews. But it was only the Germans who were saying that. There was no American sources who were saying, hey, we need to get there to fight, we need to get there to save the Jews. That's something, Thaddeus Russell talks about this, that the whole, getting involved to save the Jews from the Holocaust thing, this was a post hoc rationalization for the war. It didn't exist at the time.
I just started reading Human Smoke.
Did you?
Which
How
I
is
think
it?
He might. I didn't make it in very far, but it's it doesn't take a long time to realize that you're going to be in for a paradigm shift.
Oh yes,
So,
it's Human Smoke is a book by Nicholson
You read it?
Baker.
Did you read it?
No, I started the audiobook.
Okay.
I got maybe an hour into the audiobook.
Yeah. Yeah. A certain president and his wife immediately don't seem to be fans of people who eat kosher.
Yeah. Yeah.
That blew my mind. But
What the book is, by Nicholson Baker, Human Smoke, it's just like a compilation of letters and newspaper articles and clippings and stuff from that time that were all contemporary to that time. And he kind of paints a narrative of the whole, when does it start? It starts in the 20s or in the 30s. It lays the groundwork for the war and then everything that progressed through the war in the voices of the people at the time. And you see that Moldbug's point here is true. That there was no, the one thing, if you've listened to any interviews of Moldbug recently, he's always saying to go watch this one video that was directed by Dr. Seuss of British propaganda, British World War II propaganda talking about the Nazis. And it's like, number one, it's super elementary propaganda. It wouldn't be effective on anybody today. So it's fascinating it was effective on people back then. But it also says nothing about the Jews whatsoever. This is contemporary during the war. It says absolutely nothing about the Jews. This is a story that was retroactively created, a retroactive justification for the Americans to get into the war. But the fact of the matter is, the Americans didn't care that all these people were being killed any more than anybody else involved, really. Okay, so and he's going to get into that here. So, moreover, the Roosevelt administration. I'm back to reading Moldbug. Moreover, the Roosevelt administration at its highest level knowingly concealed the crimes of its own Russian proxies at Katyn. That's spelled Katyn if you want to look it up. An atrocity no less horrific in quality, if not quantity. America in this war is just as responsible for Russian war crimes as Germany for the work of its Lithuanian special police. Total responsibility for the offenses of one's dependents, clients, and proxies is a clear case of natural law, both at the individual and sovereign levels. So it may not have been the Americans themselves that were perpetrating these things, but it was their clients or their proxies who were doing it, and they were aware of it, and they tried to suppress it and try to keep people from finding out about it. Thereby, they earned responsibility, joint responsibility for it. One layer of camouflage is seldom sufficient. Lurking beneath the mythical war to save the Jews is the equally mythical Axis plan to conquer the world. Unlike the Holocaust, this is a genuine work of living propaganda, a device of British security coordination, which forged the infamous map in which South America is divided into Nazi Gaue. Quite simply, no such plan existed. And then he links to the book The Second World War, 1939-45, A Strategical and Tactical History by J.F.C. Fuller. And then British security coordination, he links to Desperate Deception, British Covert Operations in the United States, 1939-44, written by Thomas E. Mall. Hitler most certainly had a plan to conquer Eastern Europe. Eastern Europe is not the planet, and nor was it in any sense liberated by the war. Mein Kampf's grand strategy was that Germany must expand to the east and remain at peace with the West, especially the British Empire. Hitler's geopolitical fantasy and the perennial core of his perennial peace plans was a world in which Germany dominated the continent with land power, serving as an equal but not a rival to British maritime imperialism. Curiously, the Third Reich and the British Empire are now equally defunct. Another coincidence. Of course, having conquered the East, Hitler or his successors might have developed new appetites, revised said plans, and decided to conquer the West as well. Those requiring the 20th century to constitute the end of history are yet another class of automatic apologist. Of course, after the Anglo-Soviet split, the West in any case faced a ruthless militaristic Eastern totalitarian state with clear ambitions to world domination, and actual domination of Eastern Europe. We thus begin to see the outline of the foreign policy that Carlyle would propose for America and Britain in the 1930s. A Carlylean judges the quality of a government's actions by comparing them to what that government should have done, and he is not shy about using hindsight to construct this alternative. Or, of course, the prophecies of the master himself, the Carlylean alternative being simple, and he links to another piece here from Latter-day Pamphlets, quoting from Carlyle. When the continental nations have once got into the bottom of their Augean stable and begun to have real enterprises based on the eternal facts again, our Foreign Office may again have extensive concerns with them. And at all times, and even now, there will remain the question to be sincerely put and wisely answered. What essential concern has the British nation with them and their enterprises? Any concern at all, except that of handsomely keeping apart from them? If so, what are the methods of best managing it? At present, as was said, while Red Republic but clashes with foul bureaucracy, and nations, sunk in blind Ignavia, demand a universal suffrage parliament to heal their wretchedness, and wild anarchy and phallus worship struggle with sham kingship and extinct or galvanized Catholicism, and in the cave of the winds all manner of rotten waifs and wrecks are hurled against each other, our English interest in the controversy, however huge said controversy grow, is quite trifling. We have only in a handsome manner to say to it, tumble and rage along, ye rotten waifs and wrecks, clash and collide as seems fittest to you, and smite each other into annihilation at your own good pleasure. In that huge conflict, dismal but unavoidable, we, thanks to our heroic ancestors, having got so far ahead of you, have now no interest at all. Our decided notion is, the dead ought to bury their dead in such a case. And so we have the honor to be, with distinguished consideration, your entirely devoted Flimnap Secretary of Foreign Department. I really think Flimnap, till truer times come, ought to treat much of his work in this way. Cautious to give offense to his neighbors, resolute not to concern himself in any of their self-annihilating operations whatsoever. End quote. Thus, the Carlylean foreign policy for USG in Britain in the 1930s is the same as the Carlylean foreign policy for USG today. Abandon, disown, and release all foreign protectorates, dependents, allies, client states, puppet states, and other little friends. Rather, each sovereign nation should just mind its own business for a while and see how that works out. After a Carlylean reaction, there is no world policeman, no world judge, world parliament, or world anything. Even the traditional practice of exchanging permanent diplomats is obsolete. Governments often have things to say to each other, but they can get used to saying it by email. And if Bolivia and Paraguay wish to wage war, that war is the business of Bolivia and Paraguay. Washington has no particular interest in which side may be in the wrong. It is certainly either Bolivia, Paraguay, or both. Moreover, if Spain herself does pick a side, intervenes in favor of it, and eventually uses this as a pretext for reacquiring both Bolivia and Paraguay, the flimnaps of Foggy Bottom shall gaze serenely down on the entire affair, requesting at most that all sides avoid weapons which might cause global atmospheric or marine contamination. Thus, if we imagine this principle applied to Europe in 1933, a Carlylean regime in 1933 disavows all involvement in continental politics, including the League of Nations and the protection of various invented states of the Little Entente, all of which were in 1933 much better armed than Germany. And for those, Little Entente was an alliance formed in 1920 and 21 by Czechoslovakia, Romania, and the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, since 1929 Yugoslavia, with the purpose of common defense against Hungarian revanchism and the prospect of a Habsburg restoration. France supported the alliance by signing treaties with each member country. The rapid growth of German power caused its collapse in 1938, and it never went into wartime operation. Okay, back to Moldbug. If Germany wishes to have a war with Czechoslovakia, Poland, etc., that is the business of these nations. If Czechoslovakia and Poland wish to defend themselves from Germany, they should arm sufficiently and band themselves together for the purpose. If not, they must accept German suzerainty, which is a word that means it's a relationship in which one state or other polity controls the foreign policy and relations of a tributary state, while allowing the tributary state to have internal autonomy. The dominant state is called the suzerain. Suzerainty differs from sovereignty in that the tributary state is technically independent, but enjoys only limited self-rule. Although the situation has existed in a number of historical empires, it is considered difficult to reconcile with 20th or 21st century concepts of international law, in which sovereignty is a binary which either exists or does not. While a sovereign state can agree by treaty to become a protectorate of a stronger power, modern international law does not recognize any way of making this relationship compulsory on the weaker power. Suzerainty is a practical de facto situation rather than a legal de jure one. Back to Moldbug. So he says, if Germany wishes to have a war with Czechoslovakia, Poland, etc., that's the business of those nations. If Czechoslovakia and Poland wish to defend themselves from Germany, they should arm sufficiently and band themselves together for the purpose. If not, they must accept German suzerainty. In the actual event, they behaved as if they were armed, but the arms on which they counted were not their own, but those of Britain and France, which in retrospect were obviously insufficient to defend them. Meanwhile, of course, if these wars expel valuable refugees, especially a high-value population such as the Ashkenazi Jews, Britain and America will stand ready to snap them up, just as Frederick the Great was happy to snap up French Huguenots expelled by the revocation of the Edict of Nantes. Thus, under this strategy, Nazi Germany, assuming the most aggressive intentions, either enlarges itself to the east or fails to do so. If populations are displaced, for crazy Nazi reasons or otherwise, they are relocated to the Western Hemisphere. Trujillo in the Dominican Republic, for one, wanted as many Jews as he could get. It is possible to construct a global military disaster, genocide, etc., emerging from this counterfactual scenario, but it does not seem likely, whereas with the road taken, we know it is certain. Hindsight is a bitch. And more damningly, the Carlylean answer answers a question we didn't know we had. Remember, we have eliminated the two most frequently presumed rationales for the Allied side of the war. Roosevelt was not fighting to save the Jews, for he gives no appearance of giving a crap about the Jews. And he is not fighting to thwart the Nazi project of invading Mexico, for he knows there is no such project. What then is he fighting for? And what is the nature of the Allied cause? There is a three-word answer: the United Nations. Basically, the Anglo-American coalition, which in fact called itself United Nations during the war, is fighting for a vision, which vision might well be described even better by the name it now carries: the international community. Skeptics will note that this phrase can always be replaced with the term State Department, with negligible change to the meaning of the sentence. More concretely, the fundamental question of the war was, if Germany and Poland disagree, whose business is it? Germany's answer was, it is in the business of Germany and Poland. This answer is roughly coincident with classical international law, in which each nation is the only final judge of its interests. The Anglo-American answer was, it is the business of the international community. And so, in modern international law, it is. The Allies having defeated Germany, just as Germany defeated Poland. Might and right always converge in the end. From the perspective of classical international law, Britain, which has been acting as the sole global hyperpower since 1815, and her new partner in crime, America, are essentially asserting suzerainty over the continent. They and their stable of satellites are to make the rules of international affairs henceforth. And indeed, there is only one way for Germany to dispute this claim of suzerainty, which, like all sovereign claims, grows stronger the longer it is not disputed, and establish its status as an independent and equal country. That is to make war, needless to say without permission, on the Anglo-American client states that after the last war were created out of its territory. Thus, Anglo-American democracy causes the war, and its resulting terrors and destructions, because the nascent system of global suzerainty it set up in 1919 forces Germany to either accept a position which is permanently subordinate to the Anglo-American system or international community, effectively sacrificing her independence as a nation, or demonstrate its disobedience by violently attacking that community. The dog has been backed into a corner. It must either cringe and submit or bite. It probably should have cringed. But military causality is always a dark and difficult point to argue. This would be Carlyle's explanation of these events, I think, but it is not his most powerful argument. Not only were Stalin, Hitler, and Mao the products of bad democratic foreign policy, but their own movements could not have existed without democracy. Rather, fascism and socialism, including the various communisms, are inherent democratic phenomena. It is thus obvious that they came to exist in the century of democracy. This argument, too, may strike you as implausible, but wait and see. Because first, this nasty pair suggests a cheaper, uglier, more banal explanation for Carlyle's seeming success as a prophet. As Wikipedia correctly notes, quoting from Wikipedia, Carlyle's ideas were influential in the development of socialism, but, like the opinions of many deep thinkers of the time, were also considered to have influenced the rise of fascism. End quote. If Carlyle predicts that your house will burn down, and your house burns down, Carlyle is a prophet. But if he was seen on your porch with a can of kerosene, he's an arsonist. The plot thickens. To understand the 20th century, we have to understand what socialism is and what fascism was. To understand it from a Carlylean perspective, we need to understand the relationship of democracy to each, and to Carlyle himself. To Carlyle, democracy is the ultimate cause of the Holocaust. To democracy, or at least to Wikipedia, Carlyle is that ultimate cause. He is both prosecutor and defendant in the case. The essential step in understanding socialism and fascism is understanding the difference between these megatherions. Just for reference, megatherion is, it's Greek for the great beast. So it may refer to the beast from Revelation. It also can refer to Aleister Crowley. And so if anybody didn't know what megatherion is, that's what he's referring to. He's using kind of an artistic, older literary term to categorize fascism and socialism as basically gigantic beasts. The essential step in understanding socialism and fascism is understanding the difference between these megatherions. They are both megatherions, all right, and both born in mud. Moreover, both muds contain a significant concentration of Carlyle. But they are two very different muds, and mud should not be confused with Carlyle. While there are no qualitative distinctions in history, the difference between socialism and fascism is about as close as it comes. It's up there with virus versus bacterium, or perhaps for a closer medical analogy, liver cancer and lung cancer. Lung cancer can spread to your liver and or vice versa, but the tumor is always descended from either lung or liver. Similarly, while the structure, apparatus, and practices of socialism and fascism may, in advanced cases, converge, the origin of the malignancy is always precise and distinct. Orthodox libertarians and, increasingly, conservatives, and he links to liberal fascism in the National Review. Orthodox libertarians and increasingly conservatives have a particularly easy, wrong answer available to them on this point. The wrong answer is that socialism and fascism are two forms with negligible or cosmetic distinction of one pathology of government, statism. Statism being the condition of having an enormous government which does all kinds of stupid, useless, and or counterproductive things. This clicks naturally with the theory of Carlyle as villain. Carlyle is most certainly a statist in the abstract libertarian sense of the word. Libertarianism is in fact a revival of the Manchester liberalism of Carlyle's time, whom the reader may meet as McCrowdy, the seraphic doctor of political economy, which was terms that Carlyle used earlier on. From Carlyle's end, Manchester liberalism is one of the principal symptoms of 19th century democracy, the other being the philanthropism of Exeter Hall. Note that 21st century democracy has boosted Exeter Hall to the nth degree, but retained some fragments of Manchester liberalism only grudgingly and with contempt. This too must be explained. But here is Carlyle on McCrowdy, directly following the first passage on democracy. Real quick, McCrowdy is a reference to, I'm not sure what. Maybe we'll find out here, I don't remember. Quoting from Carlyle. Or perhaps the chief end of man being now, in these improved epochs, to make money and spend it, his interests in the universe have become amazingly simplified of late. Capable of being voted on with effect by almost anybody? To buy in the cheapest market and sell in the dearest. Truly, if that is the summary of his social duties, and the final divine message he has to follow, we may trust him extensively to vote upon that. But if it is not, and never was, or can be, if the universe will not carry in its divine bosom any commonwealth of mortals that have no higher aim, being still a temple and hall of doom, not a mere weaving shop and cattle pen, if the unfathomable universe has decided to reject human beavers pretending to be men, and will abolish, pretty rapidly perhaps, in hideous mud deluges, their markets and them unless they think of it, in that case it were better to think of it, and the democracies and universal suffrages, I can observe, will require to modify themselves a good deal. So he's basically ranting against people who think that to buy in the cheapest market and sell in the dearest is the end-all be-all of men. He's ranting against them, basically. Back to Moldbug. Observant readers will note that Carlyle, the prophet, errs here. He asserts that Manchester liberalism is so simple and obvious that it can be explained to voters, who can, he seems to vaguely imply, be trusted to vote for it. This may have been true in the 1850s. If so, voters have changed, alas. But let's examine this Carlylean critique of libertarianism. Carlyle says, libertarianism is an epiphenomenon of democracy because it is or purports to be a formula that dictates the actions of a sovereign, i.e. the government must do this and must not do that. In democratic parlance, a position, platform, or ideology. Platforms are essential to the conduct of democratic government because the only legitimate way to rule in a democracy is to construct a party which agrees on a platform. Thus, the simpler and more appealing the formula, the better. Thus, the existence of libertarianism from this skeptical and delegitimating standpoint is explained. Thus, Manchester liberalism got somewhere in mid-19th century Britain, although libertarians with more or less the same platform got nowhere in late 20th century America. Simpler and more appealing formulas such as hope and change have since been invented. Thus, Carlyle helps us explain why libertarianism was a democratic trope in the 1850s, and also why the democracy of 2009 is fundamentally unlibertarian. Anti-democratic libertarians can begin and finish their thesis here. The idea of libertarianism as a fundamental form of government, and non-libertarianism, or statism, as an equally fundamental form, is most plausibly explained by the political needs of democracy, not by any actual natural phenomenon. That said, we will accept this category, statist, a little longer. Before we look at socialism and fascism independently, we need to observe the shared Carlylean roots around which both are built. In the Carlylean narrative, socialism and fascism are both corruptions of the Carlylean ideal. They combine Carlylean truths with un-Carlylean shams. Carlyle is a statist in that he considers the state to have absolute responsibility for the well-being of the nation it governs and absolute authority to take any act it considers necessary to optimize that well-being. Quite simply, the Carlylean likes a strong hand at the tiller, and a strong tiller too. The taste he shares with the socialist and the fascist, this taste he shares with the socialist and the fascist, his fellow enthusiasts of government power. Here, all three part ways with the tradition of classical liberalism, under which so many American and British institutions were founded and refounded in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries, and whose central motif is the belief in limited and or divided government. One cannot be socialist, fascist, or Carlylean without either abandoning this belief or warping it beyond recognition. Carlyleans and fascists abandon it. Socialists warp it. So he's created a third category here, if you didn't follow this. So first of all, there's socialism and fascism, and And Wikipedia claims basically that both are descended in a sense from Carlyle. What he's saying is that they've both distorted and warped his position. So he was participating in the conversation that ultimately resulted in socialism and fascism, but Carlyleanism is a third thing altogether. So those two descended and went a different direction, and then he's going to explain to you what Carlyleanism is. But at the next stop, the Carlylean parts ways with his 20th century buddies. It is he who stays on the bus, and they who get off. Get off. Socialism and fascism produce a mix of substandard and disastrous results for a simple reason. Both originate in democracy, a precancerous growth always pregnant with some malignancy. In almost every historical case of democracy, factions have arisen which can be arranged along a right-left axis. In the Athenian era, for example, hundreds of city-states developed a factional pattern in which a nominally demotic is his word for democracy, for like categories of democracy. So it's just demotic, D-E-M-O-T-I-C. In the Athenian era, for example, hundreds of city-states developed a factional pattern in which a nominally demotic party competed against a nominally oligarchic party. This pattern must be a consequence of human nature, for it appears in all eras and populations without any apparent structure of transmission. The socialist one-party state arises through the total victory of a faction, party, or movement of the left. The fascist one-party state arises through the total victory of a faction, party, or movement of the right. Note that victory is victory, by means legal or illegal, because whoever wins dictates what it is. So if they won illegally, well, they won and they get to dictate history therefore. The stable two-party democracy remains pregnant with both, and its stability is illusory. The same nominal parties remain, but their actual positions shift inexorably toward the left. Thus we see chronic rather than acute socialism, which has the same endpoint, sclerotic emphysema of Brezhnev, but slower and with a lot less drama, unless it breaks down, of course. Note that under this definition, it is impossible to argue that Hitler was a socialist. On the Weimar political spectrum, which was no different from ours, the NSDAP was a party of the right. Thus, its total victory can only constitute the condition of fascism. Of course, you may use any definition of socialist or fascist you like, but the above will be found to closely match your intuitive sense of the matter. That's what I was saying, basically, that the political spectrum you have to look at it much wider, and the fascism and socialism are the right and left on a much smaller segment of a much larger spectrum. It is these democratic roots which fatally poison both socialism and fascism. Since the origin of the socialist or fascist regime is always a democratic party, achieving power at least partially through democratic tactics, the regime cannot escape democracy as a source of both external legitimacy and internal structure. The mark of Cain is always on it. Your captain is a strong hand on a strong ship, but he is no Baptist. Will he round the horn? Famously, if sober, otherwise in the belly of a fish. As an ingredient in government, even just a mixer, democracy is a deliriant, like Jimson weed. Cocaine sends you up, whiskey brings you down, acid swings you around. But you never know what a man will do on some Jimson weed. You might want to find another captain for the Southern Ocean. This origin in democracy should not be confused with genuine popular sovereignty or actually sailing of the ship by ballot box. Such a thing is almost unheard of. It is not that socialist or fascist states actually extend significant decision-making power to the people at large. This is almost never the case, not even in working democracies with genuine contested elections. If you look at any government of the 20th century and ask who helms the ship around the horn, who tells the sailors when and how to reef the anchor, swab the mast, or jibe the poop deck, your answer will not be the people who vote in American Idol. Your answers will be the pros, public servants, the people who always do it, which is not to say they do it right. However, a socialist or fascist state, being by definition the descendant of a democratic movement, A, cannot cease to adore some mythic construction of popular sovereignty, and B, cannot afford to lose the actual adoration of its subjects. Both are central to its legitimacy. And both, as we will see, are central to its insanity in two very different ways. Because both socialism and fascism must maintain the sham of popular government, they have the seed of mendacity always inside them. That seed always finds fertile soil, and indeed, life in a socialist or fascist state always becomes life in a jungle of lies, which is typically the least of your problems. Thus, in socialism and fascism, we see the worst of both worlds. The state is, or at least may be, strong, but it is also mad. Thus, sometimes, often, or always, its strength is wielded in the service of chaos and not cosmos. In short, the 800-pound gorilla is on acid. No wonder the Night Watchman state seems like such a tempting idea. The Carlylean insists the forces of sovereignty must be mastered. There is no alternative. To limit the state to what it should do, prohibiting it from doing what it should not do, is to commit an act of tautology. Suppose you make it promise? What use are the gorilla's promises? Either you have mastered him or not. If not, he will do as he likes. If so, you have taken his place. Observe the fascist or socialist state again through the eyes of the orthodox libertarian or classical liberal. We see an 800-pound gorilla on acid whooping it up at the wheel of a running bulldozer. Your libertarian says, stop that bulldozer. Your Carlylean says, stop that gorilla. That's the best analogy ever, at least for me. Like, just now, I get goosebumps reading that paragraph. I've gotten goosebumps every single time I've read that paragraph. That's the best way of explaining it. Let me read it one more time. Observe the fascist or socialist state again through the eyes of the orthodox libertarian or classical liberal. We see an 800-pound gorilla on acid whooping it up at the wheel of a running bulldozer. Your libertarian says, stop that bulldozer. Your Carlylean says, stop that gorilla. That's where the whole public-private distinction means nothing. This is me speaking, not Moldbug. The public-private distinction is irrelevant. All that matters is who controls the gorilla. The gorilla being whoever controls the bulldozer. The nature of the bulldozer doesn't matter. If you take an 800-pound gorilla on acid and take his bulldozer away from him, he's going to go do something else destructive. Or he's just going to beat you up and take the bulldozer back. Until you've controlled the gorilla, it doesn't matter what the bulldozer is made of. It doesn't matter how it drives or how fast it is or what fuel it uses. None of that stuff matters. All that matters is who controls the 800-pound gorilla. And the 800-pound gorilla is going to exist no matter what. There will always be an 800-pound gorilla. You can't get rid of the 800-pound gorilla. All you can do is learn to control it. And to control the 800-pound gorilla, which is ultimately like what power is, to learn to control the power in a society, there's a formula for it. You have to learn that formula, and you have to engineer that solution. Just saying the gorilla should be controlled isn't good enough. That's all that libertarians are doing. They're just saying, hey, there's a gorilla, and we need to stop the bulldozer and control the gorilla. Okay, how? You haven't presented us a solution for how. You've just presented us the solution for why. Okay, I'm persuaded. Now what? Okay, yeah, a big government is bad. Now what? Yeah, universal basic income is bad. Now what? Universal healthcare is bad. Now what? There is no, war is bad. The Fed is bad. Okay, now what? That libertarians don't have an answer to that question. And until they do, the point is irrelevant, because libertarians are the people who are sitting here pointing out, hey, an 800-pound gorilla driving a bulldozer is bad. People like, fuck off, like, why do I care about your opinion? You're not you're not improving my life in any sense. You're just saying obvious things to me. The person who sits in the room and says obvious things without presenting a solution is an asshole, and nobody likes him. And that's why nobody likes libertarians.
Well, I find that most people always want libertarians around. Like if they're having a social event, I get a lot of texts. Hey, do you know any libertarians that I can invite? Because they're usually very pleasurable to be around. That's why at least there's something appealing about constitutional conservatives, is because they're under I think maybe they might believe that, the Constitution is going to shackle the 800-pound gorilla. Yeah. If you're real careful, if we keep pursuing this metaphor, given the chapter that we're on anyway. But anyway,
yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Oh my God. Oh, I can't wait to get through the rest of this. But that one thing that's fantastic about what you said is that obviously there's a measure of tongue-in-cheekness to what you're saying, but the whose tongue is in whose cheek is the question. But there's these people, these hard asses who like think they're real awesome because they like post fuck the state on Facebook. The fact of the matter is, the people who control the gorilla, they're perfectly happy to have you around. You don't present any threat to them. You're the exact opposite of a threat to them. Like with enemies like you, you're not an enemy to the state. You're some jerk off who's just shouting things into the void. You're not actually threatening anything except for yourself when you post pictures of your what do you call it, the like their big gun room or whatever. It's okay. I mean, if it's a hobby of yours and you want to appeal to other people who have the same hobby, sure. But I'm talking about these goofballs that like post like, "Haha, don't fuck with me, Uncle Sam." You're a moron. Like this is. While this is what constitutes the liberty movement, it's no wonder that everyone's a bunch of liberty lovers. It's no wonder that there's nobody's accomplishing anything. Okay, back to Moldbug. Scrolling up. Okay. Your libertarian says, stop that bulldozer. Your Carlylean says, stop that gorilla. A bulldozer, well-made, well-maintained, and well-operated, is a positive force in the world, but only if it is controlled by a man and not a gorilla. If you saw a bulldozer driven by a qualified bulldozer operator, dear libertarian, would you cry, stop that bulldozer? I think not. You might be amazed at all the good works a qualified bulldozer operator can work with a bulldozer. Of course, the world at present contains no such thing as a qualified bulldozer operator, which is hardly the Carlyleans' fault, and it still contains men who are not gorillas and can learn. They can also be drug tested. But this analogy, though picturesque, is as far as we can go with the two together. Socialism and fascism are different things. We must examine them apart, each through the Carlylean lens. Let's do fascism first because fascism is easy. Fascism is Carlyle, implemented by swine. Thus, you can go through Carlyle, finding Carlylean heroes and replace them with swine. The result will be fascism. So here's the greatest thing. Like that right there, that's the most like insultingly devastating critique of fascists that I've ever read. Like, he just called fascists swine. And yet somehow he's accused of being a fascist. This is the thing that people that talk about Moldbug, part of our goal with these here is to get through to people that might be, they've decided I don't want to take the time to read Moldbug because I've just heard that he's a totalitarian or that he advocates tyranny or whatever, moronic stuff you've heard. We want to present to you just how preposterous that is, if for no other reason than just so we can laugh at people that say stupid things. Because I've never read more devastating critiques of fascism than I have through Moldbug. And yet he's I mean, the dude is Jewish, for goodness sakes. He's a Jewish descendant of communists who actively fought in World War II. So I want it to be clear as we're going through this, for self-preservation purposes, if nothing else, that we're not advocating any sort of guerrilla warfare. Okay, I gotta stop. Okay.
Bravo.
All right. So, okay, fascism. Okay. You can go through Carlyle, finding Carlylean heroes and replacing them with swine. The result will be fascism. This exercise is exceptionally simple for those with a progressive education. Not only do you already know everything about the crimes of fascism, how to recognize it, how to fight it, etc., you cannot conceive of a Carlylean hero who is in fact a hero and not a swine at all. Your mind rebels against the very thought. Fortunately, history, which for you is the story of the 20th century because progressives hate the past, demonstrates that in all cases, swine appear in the position at question. Therefore, the dispute is settled. With this assumption, proven by experience, let's see how Carlyle is a fascist. We might, for instance, choose this passage from Shooting Niagara. Quote, I always fancy there might much be done in the way of military drill withal. Beyond all other schooling, and as supplement or even as succedaneum, I have no idea what that is, or even as succedaneum for all other, one often wishes the entire population could be thoroughly drilled into cooperative movement, into individual behavior, correct, precise, and at once habitual and orderly as mathematics, in all or in very many points, and ultimately in the point of actual military service, should such be required of it. Soldier drill, for fighting purposes, as I have said, would be the last or finishing touch of all these sorts of drilling processes, and certainly the acknowledged king would reckon it not the least important to him, but even perhaps the most so in these peculiar times. Anarchic parliaments and penny newspapers might perhaps grow jealous of him. In any case, would he have to be cautious, punctilious, severely correct, and obey to the letter whatever laws and regulations they emitted on the subject? But, that done, how could the most anarchic parliament or penny editor think of forbidding any fellow citizen such a manifest improvement on all the human creatures round him? Our wise hero aristocrat or acknowledged king in his own territory would by no means think of employing his superlative private field regiment in levy of war against the most anarchic parliament. On the contrary, might and would loyally but help said Parliament in warring down such much anarchy worse than its own, and so gain steadily new favor from it and from all men and gods, and would have silently the consciousness, too, that with every new disciplined man he was widening the arena of anti-anarchy, of God-appointed order in this world and nation, and was looking forward to a day very distant probably, but certain as fate. For I suppose it would in no moment be doubtful to him that, between anarchy and anti-ditto, it would have to come to sheer fight at last, and that nothing short of duel to the death would ever void that great quarrel, and he would have his hopes, his assurances as to how the victory would lie. For everywhere in this universe and in every nation that is not divorced from it, and in the act of perishing forever, anti-anarchy is silently on the increase at all moments. Anarchy, not but contrariwise, having the whole universe forever set against it, pushing it slowly at all moments towards suicide and annihilation. To anarchy, however million-headed, there is no victory possible. Patience, silence, diligence, ye chosen of the world. Slowly or fast in the course of time, you will grow to a minority that can actually step forth, sword not yet drawn, but sword ready to be drawn, and say, "Here are we, sirs, we also are minded to vote, to all lengths, as you may perceive, a company of poor men, as friend Oliver termed us, who will spend all our blood, if needful," reference to Oliver Cromwell. What are Beales and his 50,000 roughs against such? Edmund Beales, president of the Reform League and a central figure in the 19th century British Reform movement. And his 50,000 roughs, and rough is a reference to, I'm guessing, like ruffians or people who were fighting, a military group. What are Beales and his 50,000 roughs against such? What are the noisiest anarchic parliaments in majority of 1,000,000 to 1 against such? Stubble against fire. Fear not, my friend, the issue is very certain when it comes so far as this. Close quote. Fortified by your progressive education, which is at this moment flashing the red alert, you see instantly that this program, implemented by swine, is fascism, and implemented by non-swine, it has no name, for history has yet to see its like. And where do the swine come from? In the 20th century? Gosh, in the age of democracy, why would one find a sudden effusion of swine in government? A famous Hitler campaign poster showed him with Hindenburg, quote, the field marshal and the corporal. Traditionally, of course, any such fraternization would be a military offense. Again, fascism is fascism because it arises out of democracy. Against the left of intellectual consensus, universalist philosophy, bureaucratic disinterest, and bohemian disorder, it pits the forces of popular consensus, parochial tradition, vested or corrupt interests, and military order. Each of the above has its place, both the Athenian perspective of the left and the Spartan judgment of the right. A healthy society can see itself through any of these glasses or all, but none in recent memory has combined the Athenian and the Spartan virtues. It is a difficult merger. Carlylean order does not preclude the Bohemian, but the combination is delicate at the least. But to create this Spartan force in a democracy is to create, essentially, the Nazi Party, or the Republican Party. If your party is just a theatrical production and has no actual intent of seizing power, it is the latter. If its plan, hopefully not a secret plan, is one man, one vote, one time, it is the former. Neither is a benefit to humanity, at least as described. When the NSDAP seized absolute power, or the Nazi Party, when it seized absolute power, what seized absolute power was an organization which was more or less a government in exile, whose leader was a palpable nut, and whose supporters consisted largely of the lower middle classes, relatively ignorant and ill-informed. This was not a military coup, it was the electoral victory of a democratic political party. Had Weimar been terminated by a military coup, perhaps under Captain Ehrhardt or the like, the order that replaced it might have been a military order, a complete renunciation of democracy, a return to the Prussian traditions of Frederick the Great. Instead, as a democratic movement, the militarism of the Nazis had a notable paramilitary quality. For instance, calling the SA was rather as if Youth for Western Civilization were to name its paintball brigade the Special Forces. It's definitely not the way to get the actual Special Forces on your side. It is this tradition, the line between military honor and tradition, and paramilitary brawling and thuggery, that separates men from swine, and Carlyle from fascism. The trouble is that if you try to modify the Nazi path to power to remove the swine, it is not clear that you have a path to power. There were plenty of non-swinish German nationalists competing with the Nazis. Only the Nazis, however, could build an entire party of swine. And even in Germany, enough swine and friends of swine could be found, which is hardly surprising when you see that the choice was not the Nazis or nothing, but the Nazis or Weimar. So once the Nazis seize power, power is held by a party of swine, with Hitler at the top. Many have joined the party because they want to help restore Germany. Many have joined it because they want to get ahead. Some have joined it because they want to get revenge on the Jews. It is this organization, nominally under Hitler's absolute rule, but in practice more dangerous to him than he is to it, that now rules Germany. And at the bottom, below the party, is the Deutsche Volk, whose opinions are coordinated by the propaganda techniques familiar to all and coordinated quite successfully too. This too is a relic of democracy, popular sovereignty. This is the outline of a mafia state. This pyramid can impose order outside itself, but internally it is not and can never be ordered. Germany is a sea of warring acronymic agencies, increasingly corrupt. The Nazi system is still often dynamic and successful because it is so new and so young. Had it lived longer, however, the structure of bureaucracy and venality would have ossified, producing a transition not unlike that between the regimes of Louis IX and Louis the XIV and Louis XVI. Roman numerals. Hitler was certainly no Frederick the Great, and even Frederick's system did not fare well under his dissolute heir, which was Frederick William II of Prussia. Thus, what we see in fascism is the last gasp of the European ancien regime, heavily contaminated by vices implicit in the attempt to restore order by democratic means. On to socialism. It is just as easy to find the link from Carlyle to socialism. Walt Whitman will find it for us. Quoting Whitman. Then the simplicity and amid ostensible frailty, the towering strength of this man, a hardy oak knot you could never wear out, an old farmer dressed in brown clothes and not handsome, his very foibles fascinating. Who cares that he wrote about Dr. Francia and shooting Niagara and the not appropriate for YouTube question, the N-word question, and didn't at all admire our United States? I doubt if he ever thought or said half as bad words about us as we deserve. How he splashes like Leviathan in the seas of modern literature and politics. Doubtless, respecting the latter, one needs first to realize from actual observation the squalor, vice, and doggedness ingrained in the bulk population of the British Islands, with the red tape, the fatuity, the flunkyism everywhere, to understand the last meanings in his pages. Accordingly, though he was no Chartist or radical, I consider Carlyle's by far the most indignant comment or protest about the fruits of feudalism today in Great Britain, the increasing poverty and degradation of the homeless, landless 20 millions, while a few thousands, or rather a few hundreds, possess the entire soil, the money, and the fat berths. Trade and shipping, and clubs and culture, and prestige and guns, and a fine select class of gentry and aristocracy, with every modern improvement, cannot begin to salve or defend such stupendous hoggishness. Close quote. Whitman is not making any of this up. You will indeed see Carlyle, especially in his early works, before he has entirely rid himself from his old group of radical friends, to be exact, take just this tack. Much of it is still found in Chartism, which was written in 1840. Carlyle will criticize economic inequality, mock laissez-faire economics, deplore the growing dehumanization of the new British proletariat, denounce industrial pollution, call for massive national literacy campaigns, propose that government organize unemployed workers, etc., etc., etc. All these ambitions of the muscular state are distinctively socialist. Of course, they are not exclusively socialist aims, since we see them also under Hitler. Aims alone do not enable us to distinguish socialist and fascist regimes, which are distinguished by origin rather than result. Over the long run, the two can develop a remarkably similar structure and apparatus. I suspect the Third Reich, had it survived, would have looked rather Brezhnevian by the 1980s. But this is parallel evolution, analogy, not homology. For a deeper connection between socialism and Carlyle, we need to understand the shared inspiration of the two. Since Carlyle was considerably under the influence of Scottish Calvinism, and the roots of socialism run through Calvinist Puritanism, the religious connection does not require a great leap of faith, and he links to The Puritan Origins of American Patriotism by George McKenna. The Carlylean imperative of the state is to discover the laws of God and implement them on earth. This is a dream easily recognized in the progressive of a century ago, a Herbert Croly or Edward Bellamy or Benjamin Franklin Trueblood, none of whom would have had any qualms in describing his utopia as a New Jerusalem. Finally, we need to recognize perhaps the most distinctive and subtle quality of socialism, which is that socialism, again in origin, though this quality disappears in the nasty end stages, is a fundamentally aristocratic movement. Moreover, it is aristocratic in the Carlylean sense, the actual meaning of the word, rule of the best. Socialism, always in origin and perpetually in the true democratic state which still contains a competing right, is the alliance of the smartest, the wealthiest, the most powerful, and the most beautiful. You can see that today. It's that all of the progressive socialist critical race theory, Church of Woke, all this stuff is all originating from and most loudly stated within the aristocracy, within the nobility, the elites. It's a culturally elite thing. It comes from Hollywood and then the media. All of these apparatuses, these are all middle upper class people, or at least people who have the psychology of a middle upper class person. One thing you know from Girard is that humans are mimickers. The mimetic theory of desire, that we don't know what we want, so we just mimic people and we mimic what they want. So we derive our desires from the desires of people who we mimic. And it's the upper class, it's the elites, it's the aristocracy that always defines culture, and everybody mimics them. They do what the elites do. They mimic them and behave like them. And so they're the ones that ultimately drive the culture. What's interesting is if you listen to Thaddeus Russell, as a small aside, the elites, where did they get their culture from? Well, they always feel kind of bound up and stodgy because they have all this formal etiquette and everything that they need to abide by, and they're jealous of the people on the absolute fringes of society.
I was going to say, yeah, they find something from the fringes in, through, different means, right? Like it becomes clear, oh, this can be used. I can get power from, whether it's a conscious or, just kind of like implicitly sort of observed kind of a thing. They will, it's always like fringe culture that gets taken over eventually by sociopaths.
Right.
And just, anything that you like. Then, when you have something, your favorite band, your favorite genre of music. Yeah. It just, inevitably becomes popular and, then certainly gets taken over by sociopaths, especially if it has some utility. There's a really great, this is a blog post maybe, geeks, mops, and sociopaths. It's really awesome. It just sort of talks about how how sort of cultures happen and like what happens to the cultures. But yeah, and then of course you have all these beautiful people who are going to be drawn to something that somehow gives them power. Like you watch the Oscars, and not even just because I heard it happen last night, but that's just like a really good sort of indicator, that you have all these people just kind of spontaneously coordinated on the same page, just rewarded with money and applause, and it's not coincidental by any means.
Right.
But it's cool that one of my peers, Thaddeus Russell, has also sort of subscribed to that theory. It must have been in an email, one of our text conversations.
Yeah, he went back and wrote Renegade History of the United States based on input that Stephen gave him. It was funny that you mentioned music, like your favorite band, because that's a fantastic way to demonstrate this, or to illustrate it, that music, like modern popular music, is almost entirely derived from like slave spirituals and music that came through the slaves and through the lower classes of like black people and sexual minorities and stuff, who are all out on the fringes of society. They're the ones who formed the culture. And Thaddeus's his argument, I guess, is that for them it's because they had nothing to lose. They were already the dregs of society, so they were uninhibited and they were free to be creative and do whatever they want. And that's where ultimately, if you look out on the fringes of society today, the things that people on the fringes are saying and doing, you can see where society is going, because those are the ones that the ruling class ultimately draws from. They draw from the stuff that's the most radical and fringy, and they form it into they institutionalize it and bureaucratize it, And then everybody else who wants to be wealthy and powerful, they mimic the wealthy and powerful. And then, so you get this kind of circular loop that happens. And that's the way that ideas progress through society. So then again, you get this thing from the beginning where we talked about the intolerant individual or the minorities who lock themselves down and say, no, I'm not going to be moved. Those are the ones who, like, by definition, are the fringe of society, but they're the ones that ultimately drive the bus on society. So anyways, let's get back to this because we still got a decent bit to go here. Okay. So socialism, always in origin and perpetually in the true democratic state, which still contains a competing right, is the alliance of the smartest, the wealthiest, the most powerful, and the most beautiful. The left is the faction of the professors, the scientists, and the scholars, the cognitive elite. Real quick, that blog post that you mentioned, if you can find it and send me the link to it, then I'll put it in the show notes afterwards. The left is the faction of the professors, the scientists, and the scholars, the cognitive elite. It is the faction of the true ultra-rich, the old money, the Rockefellers, the Vanderbilts, the Fords, and their Trustafarian hipster junkie grandchildren. And to which he links a New York Times article about Dash Snow, East Village artistic rebel, dies at 27. It is the faction of the journalists and the bureaucrats, the activists and the astroturfers, the wielders of power. For those who don't know what astroturfing is, he links to a thing about David Axelrod, who's a very, very fascinating person to study. Axelrod is like the modern Saul Alinsky. He's a close Clinton insider, and the degree to which he has just completely overtaken the left, the way that the left functions. All these astroturf campaigns, which is where you take a campaign that is supposed to look grassroots, but it's seeded from the top. So it's not an actual grassroots campaign. It's been astroturfed. It's been made to look grassroots, but it's actually being orchestrated and coordinated from the top. He's the absolute master of that. And I think it was someone wrote a book about him, and I can't remember the name of the artist or the author. I'll find it and I'll put it in the show notes afterwards. So if you're listening here, it'll be in the show notes. But yeah, so he links to that. So the left is the faction of the journalists and the bureaucrats, the activists and the astroturfers, the wielders of power. And of course, it is the faction of movie stars and other celebrities who, for all their flaws, have climbed a long, greasy pole, sometimes literally. The closer you get to the top in a democratic society, the more pervasive socialism becomes. So, Carlyle said to his readers, England is going to the dogs. A new aristocracy is needed to replace the old, stultified, dying, hereditary caste of land and title. This must be an aristocracy of merit and service, a true nobility. It must cast aside the dogmas of laissez-faire and be unafraid to govern, to garden, to intervene and improve. It's interesting if you study, to make another note here, if you study the Machiavellians, they talk about Pareto talks about the circulation of the elites. And one of the points he makes is that the elites, there has to be some sort of a method whereby the elites can get fresh blood into their circle. So they get new ideas, new people, they keep things flowing. Because if they don't, if you get a cutoff between the plebs and the elites, between the serfs and the aristocrats, if it's not possible to transfer yourself between them, then the serfs realize there's nothing for them to do. They can't accomplish anything, and they get rowdy and start revolting, and you get an unstable society, and ultimately they mass revolt and overthrow and kill the aristocrats, and they start society over again. So in order to maintain a society in a stable sense, to the own self-interest of the elites, they have to be letting other people in all the time and bringing in and cultivating and training new elites, because then people feel like they have something to live for. They feel like they have something to strive for and to attain. And what we're seeing now is increasingly, as with the disappearance of the middle class is the rungs on the ladder to get from the lower class to the upper class. If you eliminate the middle class and there's no way for someone to get from the bottom to the top, then they have nothing left to strive for. They have no meaning, and society will rapidly fall apart after that. And that's what's happening now. Back to Moldbug. Okay, so there must be an aristocracy of merit and service, a true nobility. It must cast aside the dogmas of laissez-faire and be unafraid to govern, to garden, to intervene and improve. And indeed, the Christian socialism of the Fabians and progressives, rooted not only in Carlyle but in Ruskin and Morris and Dickens, developed precisely along these lines. Its goal was to improve society, both physically and morally, through the energy and nobility of the state. And indeed, it outcompeted all major competitors. There is no school of Carlyleans today, but every school that isn't a madrasa in Qom, I don't know exactly how to pronounce that, but it's a city in Iran, Qom, Qom. Every school that isn't a madrasa in Qom is a school of progressivism. And the trouble was, it was all wrong. The results were exactly opposite the original intent. The poor were not morally uplifted and converted into gentlemen. They were degraded and converted into savages. A new underclass of unprecedented human degeneration appeared below the proletariat. The New Jerusalem did not arrive. New Babylons, new Hades, new Armageddons beyond words, enormous megatherians all, slithered up on their great bellies. Alas, socialism can be explained in one sentence. Socialism is the last stage of democracy. The process may be fast and bloody, as in the French and Russian revolutions, or slow and mostly peaceful, as in Britain, but it is not generally reversible by any conventional means. By pouring their talents into the democratic movement, the new aristocracy of progressivism ensured the following results. And I need a drink because my throat's getting hoarse.
So not to be a buzzkill, but I've gotta leave in a bit to travel, so I don't know if this is gonna ruin everything.
If you need to drop out, then go ahead and just drop out, and I'll finish.
Okay. All right. I'm here with you for now.
Okay, go ahead and say. You can say something, and I'll like at least say goodbye.
I'll start taking my shirt off. I'm kidding. I won't.
There you go.
And if I did, I would rub myself with the ointment from Paloma Verde.
PalomaVerdeStore.com. Use promo code KING.
Absolutely. My legs do feel better. I've been rubbing them the whole time. As I sun my milky thighs, I've been rubbing on the ointment in, and they feel better. I might be able to work out again tomorrow.
That's like just the best endorsement we could possibly give him. Carlos, aren't you happy? We gave you such a great endorsement. Okay. By pouring their talents into the democratic movement, the new aristocracy of progressivism ensured the following results. First, that bad ideas would blossom and good ones wither and disappear. Progressivism has become a veritable religion of quack government. Its policies are always counterintuitive. It preaches leniency as the cure for crime, timidity as military genius, profligacy as the acme of economics, special education as the heart of pedagogy, indulgence as oversight, appeasement as diplomacy. As it goes from one disaster to the next, progressivism never considers the possibility that the obvious, rather than its opposite, could be the case. Occam's butter knife is the only tool in its kitchen. So everywhere that socialism or communism triumphs, we see the same phenomena. Hypertrophy of the bureaucracy, destruction and or assimilation of organizations outside the state, expansion and widespread delinquency of the underclass, decimation of the working class, decay and disappearance of manufacturing industries, persecution of upper classes and successful minorities, destruction of old cities and production of hideous totalitarian architecture, ubiquitous depression, both economic and psychiatric. These effects are not pleasant to anyone, progressive or otherwise, but their production does not slacken. Except for the occasional psychopath, a man to be found in all walks of life, this is never the intent of the socialist. My own grandfather was a CPUSA member, Communist Party, and this was certainly not his intent. Nonetheless, they all happened. And the CPUSA is again best friends with the White House, just as if it were 1934 or South Africa. And so he linked to an article, the Communist Party USA, written July 1, 2009, Changes Here and Changes Coming, which was these were remarks, I'm not sure by whom. It wasn't Obama because it references Obama. I don't know. It was remarks by somebody at a national committee meeting. And then he also, in South Africa, he links to the Tripartite Alliance, which is an alliance between the African National Congress, the Congress of South African Trade Unions, and the South African Communist Party. The alliance was forged in 1990 after the movements opposed to white minority rule by apartheid government. The Tripartite Alliance is known as the Revolutionary Alliance and just the Alliance. So it says, but why? What causes this pattern of repeated failure? Why, with its intellectual firepower, can progressivism not self-correct? After all, its public policy experts are supposed to be scientists. They publish papers with numbers. Surely this makes them scientists, and science is self-correcting, i.e. always right. Alas, not everyone who writes papers with numbers is a scientist. The most you can say is that your subject is either a scientist or a pseudoscientist. Also, while it is correct to note that science can be self-correcting, it is incorrect to assume that it must be, i.e. is incorruptible. Nothing whatsoever is incorruptible, certainly not science. The Platonic guardians of the socialist state, scientists, planners, bureaucrats, or whatever you call them, persistently prefer bad ideas because of the organizational structure of the socialist state. Again, democracy is the fundamental and irrecoverable flaw. Because socialism is democratic, it distrusts, opposes, and tends to destroy organizational structures which are built on A, hierarchical command, B, personal responsibility, and or C, financial interests. Your socialist state will never produce a structure in which a single planner is responsible for, say, North Carolina, can fire whomever he likes in the administration of North Carolina, and gets fired himself if North Carolina does not blossom into a subtropical Eden. This is an organizational structure that one might find in, say, the British Raj. It is not democratic in nature nor socialist. Instead, the socialist state divides power and spreads it as widely as possible, within itself, of course. Its decisions are not personal, but procedural. A procedure is a better procedure if it cuts more stakeholders into the loop, if it is a more open process. Here we see clearly what the state is doing. It is building a support base from its own employee roster, and it is purchasing support by exchanging it for power. The feeling of being in the decision loop produces a remarkable effect of emotional loyalty, no matter how trivial the actual authority may be. There is just a slight downside to this. When socialism fails, no one is responsible. No system of ideas, even, can be responsible. For a system of ideas would be an ideology, and public policy is not determined by ideology. Thus, many will tell you that economics failed in the crisis of 2008, but no one can possibly do anything about it. Certainly, no producer of economic wisdom in the universities, nor consumer in Washington, need feel even slightly threatened. Tenure is tenure, and civil service protection is civil service protection. Our masters serve for life. Moreover, in an environment where failure confers no punishment, we would expect bad policies to outcompete good ones, much as islands without predators are dominated by flightless birds. Freed from the need to actually succeed, the bad policies can offer everything to everyone, permanently. But alas, no dodo is forever. Thus the power of socialism to take a perfectly good aristocracy and corrupt it to the service of lies, incompetence, and the devil. The trouble is that for anyone to get a tiny slice of power's pie, no one can actually do the job of ruling, a concept which conflicts with the entire idea of public policy. A government based on the principle of hierarchical rule simply does not have enough work for all the aristocrats who need to feel important. It is too damned efficient. Thus it is abhorred and shunned by all. So here's what he's touching on here is the reality that part of the reason that we have a state as large as we do is because of libertarianism, because of the ideas behind libertarianism, which were to limit government. So you limit government by dividing it, by keeping it from being too big of a single entity. But when you do that, you make it larger. You're thinking of size in the wrong terms. You shouldn't be thinking of government size in terms of like no one organization can have too much power. You should be thinking of government size in the terms of the total number of people who are involved in it. But we don't want to think that way because we've been trained and conditioned to believe that fewer people with more power is bad. But it isn't necessarily. Were you going to say something?
I was gonna just kind of note that this was written in 2009.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so just that last bit about just hearing some of the buzzwords like science and corruptible and such. I just want to say it doesn't make me think of anything that's happening over the past year plus.
Right.
Yeah, nothing comes to mind. And with that, I'm gonna bid everyone adieu. I hope Matthew is able to just make the whole screen him, and there's not some weird black figure on the right-hand side of your screen. But it was a pleasure, and we'll see you Thursday.
All right, see you, buddy.
Bye.
There we go. Now the full screen is me. It is just me. I'm sure Steven's probably going to keep up in the comments because he likes to do that. Which, by the way, I'm sorry that I haven't really been involved in the comments in this episode. I know that this piece is long, and I'm doing everything I can to get through it as quickly as we can, while also maximizing on the content. So we'll be involved with the comments more in the future. Back to the reading. Second, and worse to the Carlylean eye, because it embraces democracy only to contradict it completely, socialism has a permanent core of mendacity, which breeds new lies the way a clogged bird bath breeds mosquitoes. Let me double check here real quick and make sure that my audio didn't screw up, because my audio did something weird when he joined earlier. So bear with me for just a sec here, folks. Make sure. Okay, good. It's still working. All right. And back to it. Part of the problem with being on a delay is I can't just ask you guys. I have to make sure that I figure it out myself. Okay. Second, and worst, the Carlylean because it embraces democracy only to contradict it completely, socialism has a permanent core of mendacity, which breeds new lies the way a clogged bird bath breeds mosquitoes. This sham aspect is at the root of all its failures. To the Carlylean, no structure built on lies can be expected to last. Hold on here. Pull this down here so that I can see you guys' comments, because now if I'm tracking it by myself, I want to make sure that if something's going on that I can tell what you guys are saying. Okay, thanks for bearing with me, guys. There we go. Split screen it, and I can see you guys and all the delightful little things you're saying, and I can keep reading. Okay. Now I got to find where I was. Okay. For the progressive does not actually believe in the philosopher's stone of democracy, the instinctive and growing wisdom of the masses, Walt Whitman's wet dream. He, in fact, despises, often, though not always rightly, all ideas that flow from the masses up. These are ideologies, and their electoral manifestations, politics. Nothing is so important as keeping government apolitical and non-ideological. Or to be more precise, nothing is so important as keeping government in the hands of its platonic guardians, the aforementioned progressive aristocracy. Who alone can round Cape Horn? For everything that the socialist state does, in Moscow then and Washington now, there is an entire cast of scientists, exquisitely trained and rigorously selected, from whom all apolitical and non-ideological public policies flow. Not since the heyday of the Board of Rights or the logothete of the course has such intellectual firepower been trained on the problem of government. The power flow of democracy is simply reversed. Rather than the sovereign people leading and directing their public servants, it is the servants who lead and the people who follow. The function of elections and elected officials in a progressive democracy is to educate the electorate, to speak from the bully pulpit, to help it become the progressive and enlightened people that it deserves to be, in classic AstroTurf style. Thus, elections become simply another propaganda mechanism. If this mechanism fails every now and then, the progressive establishment has more than enough institutional inertia to wait it out and defeat any temporary attack of the primitives. And he links to Dean Acheson, who was an American statesman and lawyer. He was the Secretary of State under Truman, and he played a central role in defending American foreign policy during the Cold War. Read the book The Brothers by about the Dulles brothers by Stephen Kinzer for a really good treatment of that era, and also The War State by Michael Swanson. It's another really good treatment about the rise of the American intelligence services and you know the Kennedy assassination through that whole era. Dean Acheson features prominently in that time period. So, if elections fail every now and then, the progressive establishment has more than enough institutional inertia to wait out and defeat any temporary attack of the primitives. That's what we just saw over the last 4 years. That was a failure. The election failed. So they had to wait it out. They had to bog the Trump administration down in as much as they could for 4 years, and then they had to reassert their control over this propaganda mechanism of elections, and that's exactly what they've done. No permanent imprint on Washington can be or ever has been left by the post-progressive right, from McCarthy through Bush. Indeed, in Europe, there is nothing at all like the Republicans, and daily life in Europe seems more or less the same for it. So there is a sham here. To be fair, this sham is hardly a socialist invention. It is a staple of democracy in all eras. Robert Michaels described it well as the iron law of oligarchy almost a year ago, which is that it asserts that rule by an elite or oligarchy is inevitable as an iron law without any democratic organization as part of the tactical and technical necessities of organization. His theory states that all complex organizations, regardless of how democratic they are when started, eventually develop into oligarchies. And I think that's been pretty well proven. So it seems easy to excuse progressives for merely finding this natural tactical feature of politics and taking advantage of it. And in fact, it is. But it is also interesting to examine the result. Lies are always interesting, and those who defend them still more so. Those with a taste for historical scholarship of less august vintage than we usually prefer here at UR may enjoy Edmund S. Morgan's Inventing the People from 1988. In this multi-century survey, winner of the Bancroft Prize, the author, Professor Emeritus at Yale, repeatedly and deliberately describes the legal and constitutional doctrines of the Democratic faction in Anglo-American history as fictions. The body of the book is quite well composed and quite thoroughly damning, to my ear at least. Professor Morgan, however, wants to make sure that we do not take this as any kind of fiction or as any kind of criticism. Rather, he is a cold-eyed believer in what, here at UR, we call psychological security. In his introduction, he writes, quoting from Professor Edmund S. Morgan, "Government requires make-believe. Make-believe that the king is divine, make-believe that he can do no wrong, or make-believe that the voice of the people is the voice of God. Make-believe that the people have a voice, or make-believe that the representatives of the people are the people. Make-believe that governors are the servants of the people. Make-believe that all men are equal, or make-believe that they are not. The political world of make-believe mingles with the real world in strange ways, for the make-believe world may often mold the real one. In order to be viable, in order to serve its purpose, whatever that purpose may be, a fiction must bear some resemblance to fact. If it strays too far from fact, the willing suspension of disbelief collapses. And, conversely, it may collapse if facts stray too far from the fiction that we want them to resemble. Because fictions are necessary, because we cannot live without them, we often take pains to prevent their collapse by moving the facts to fit the fiction, by making the world conform more closely to what we want it to be. We sometimes call it, quite appropriately, reform or reformation, when the fiction takes command and reshapes reality. Although fictions enable the few to govern the many, it is not only the many who are constrained by them. In the strange commingling of political make-believe and reality, the governing few, no less than the governing many, may find themselves limited, we may even say reformed, by the fictions on which their authority depends. Not only authority, but liberty too may depend on fictions. Indeed, liberty may depend, however deviously, on the very fictions that support authority. That, at least, has been the case in the Anglo-American world, and modern liberty, for better or for worse, was born, or perhaps we should say invented, in that world and continues to be nourished there. Because it is a little uncomfortable to acknowledge that we rely so heavily on fictions, we generally call them by some more exalted name. We may proclaim them as self-evident truths, and that designation is not inappropriate, for it implies our commitment to them and at the same time protects them from challenge. Among the fictions we accept today as self-evident are those that Thomas Jefferson enshrined in the Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal, and that they owe obedience to government only if it is their own agent, deriving its authority from their consent. It would be difficult, if not impossible, to demonstrate these propositions by factual evidence. It might be somewhat easier by the kind of evidence we usually require for the proof of any debatable proposition to demonstrate that men are not created equal and that they have not delegated authority to any government. But self-evident propositions are not debatable, and to challenge those would rend the fabric of our society. It is not the purpose of this book to challenge them, and my use of the word fiction has no such intention. I have been troubled by the pejorative connotations attached to the word, but I have been unable to find a better one to describe the different phenomena to which I have applied it. I can only hope that the readers who persevere to the end of the book will recognize that the fictional qualities of popular sovereignty sustain rather than threaten the human values associated with it. To which Carlyle has an answer, and a terrible one. I leave you with his words, and this is quoting from Latter-day Pamphlets. What is democracy, this huge inevitable product of the destinies, which is everywhere the portion of our Europe in these latter days? There lies the big question for us. Whence comes it, this universal big black democracy? Whither tends it? What is the meaning of it? A meaning it must have, or it would not be here. If we can find the right meaning of it, we may, wisely submitting or wisely resisting and controlling, still hope to live in the midst of it. If we cannot find the right meaning, if we find only the wrong or no meaning in it, to live will not be possible. The whole social wisdom of the present time is summoned, in the name of the giver of wisdom, to make clear to itself and lay deeply to heart with an eye to strenuous valiant practice and effort what the meaning of this universal revolt of the European populations, which calls itself democracy and decides to continue permanent, may be. Certainly it is a drama full of action, event fast following event, in which curiosity finds endless scope and there are interests at stake enough to rivet the attention of all men, simple and wise. Whereat Whereat the idle multitude lift up their voices, gratulating, celebrating sky high, and rhyme and prose announcement, more than plentiful, that now the new era, and long expected year one of perfect human felicity has come. Glorious and immortal people, sublime French citizens, heroic barricades, triumph of civil and religious liberty, O heaven! One of the inevitablest private miseries to an earnest man in such circumstances is this multitudinous efflux of oratory and psalmody from the universal foolish human throat, drowning for the moment all reflection whatsoever except the sorrowful one that you are fallen in an evil, heavy-laden, long-eared age, and must resignedly bear your part in the same. The front wall of your wretched old crazy dwelling, long denounced by you to no purpose, having at last fairly folded itself over, and fallen prostrate into the street the floors, as may happen, will still hang on by the mere beam ends, and coherency of old carpentry, though in a sloping direction, and depend there till certain poor rusty nails and worm-eaten dovetailings give way. But is it cheering in such circumstances that the whole household burst forth into celebrating the new joys of light and ventilation, liberty and picturesqueness of a position, and thank God that now they have got a house to their mind? My dear household, cease singing and psalmodying. Lay aside your fiddles, take out your work implements if you have any, for I can say with confidence the laws of gravitation are still active, and rusty nails, worm-eaten dovetailings, and secret coherency of old carpentry are not the best basis for a household. In the lanes of Irish cities, I have heard say, the wretched people are sometimes found living, and perilously boiling their potatoes, on such swing floors and inclined planes hanging on by the joist ends. But I did not hear that they sang very much in celebration of such lodging. No, they slid gently about, sat near the back wall, and perilously boiled their potatoes, in silence for the most part. High shouts of exultation, in every dialect, by every vehicle of speech and writing, rise from far and near over this last avatar of democracy in 1848. And yet, to wise minds, the first aspect it presents seems rather to be one of boundless misery and sorrow. What can be more miserable than this universal hunting out of the high dignitaries, solemn functionaries, and potent, grave, and reverend signors of the world? This stormful rising up of the inarticulate, dumb masses everywhere against those who pretended to be speaking for them and guiding them. These guides, then, were mere blind men only pretending to see? These rulers were not ruling at all? They had merely got on the attributes and clothes of rulers and were surreptitiously drawing the wages while the work remained undone. The kings were sham kings, play acting as at Drury Lane. And what were the people withal that took them for real? It is probably the hugest disclosure of falsity in human things that was ever at one time made. These reverend dignitaries that sat amid their far-shining symbols and long-sounding, long-admitted professions were mere impostors then? Not a true thing they were doing, but a false thing. The story they told men was a cunningly devised fable. The gospels they preached to them were not an account of man's real position in this world, but an incoherent fabrication of dead ghosts and unborn shadows, of traditions, cants, indolences, cowardices, a falsity of falsities, which at last ceases to stick together. Willfully and against their will, these high units of mankind were cheats then, and the low millions who believed in them were dupes, a kind of inverse cheats too, or they would not have believed in them so long. A universal bankruptcy of imposture, that may be the brief definition of it. Imposture everywhere declared once more to be contrary to nature. Nobody will change its word into an act any farther. Fallen insolvent, unable to keep its head up by these false pretenses, or make its pot boil any more for the present. A more scandalous phenomenon, wide as Europe, never afflicted the face of the sun. Bankruptcy everywhere, foul ignominy, and the abomination of desolation in all high places, odious to look upon as the carnage of a battlefield on the morrow morning, a massacre not of the innocents, we cannot call it a massacre of the innocents, but a universal tumbling of impostors and impostures into the street. Such a spectacle, can we call it joyful? There is a joy in it to the wise man too, yes, but a joy full of awe, and as it were sadder than any sorrow. Like the vision of immortality, unattainable except through death and the grave. And yet, who would not, in his heart of hearts, feel piously thankful that imposture has fallen bankrupt? By all means, let it fall bankrupt. In the name of God, let it do so, with whatever misery to itself and to all of us. Imposture, be it known then, known it must and shall be, is hateful, unendurable to God and man. Let it understand this everywhere, and swiftly make ready for departure wherever it yet lingers, and let it learn never to return if possible. The eternal voices, very audibly again, are speaking to proclaim this message from side to side of the world. Not a very cheering message, but a very indispensable one. Alas, it is sad enough that anarchy is here, that we are not permitted to regret its being here. For who that had for this divine universe an eye which was human at all, could wish that shams of any kind, especially that sham kings, should continue? No, at all costs, it is to be prayed by all men that shams may cease. Good heavens, to what depths have we got, when this to many a man seems strange? Yet strange to many a man it does seem, and to many a solid Englishman, wholesomely digesting his pudding among what are called the cultivated classes, it seems strange exceedingly. A mad, ignorant notion, quite heterodox and big with mere ruin. He has been used to decent forms long since fallen empty of meaning, to plausible modes, solemnities grown ceremonial, what you and your iconoclast humor call shams, all his life long. Never heard that there was any harm in them, that there was any getting on without them. Did not cotton spin itself, beef grow, and groceries and spiceries come in from the east and west quite comfortably by the side of shams? Kings reigned, what they were pleased to call reigning. Lawyers pleaded, bishops preached, and honorable members perorated. And to crown the whole, as if it were all real and no sham there, did not scrip continue saleable, and the banker pay in bullion or paper with a metallic basis? The great sham, I have always thought, is he that would destroy shams. Even so, to such depth have I, the poor knowing person of this epoch, got, almost below the level of lowest humanity, and down towards the state of apehood and oxhood. For never till quite recent generations was such a scandalous blasphemy quietly set forth among the sons of Adam. Never before did the creature called man believe generally in his heart that lies were the rule in this earth, that in deliberate, long-established lying could there be help or salvation for him, could there be at length other than hindrance and destruction for him. O Heaviside, my solid friend, this is the sorrow of sorrows. What on earth can become of us till this accursed enchantment, the general summary and consecration of delusions, be cast forth from the heart and life of one and all? Cast forth it will be. It must, or we are tending at all moments with a word I do not like to name. Alas, and the casting of it out, to what heights and what depths will it lead us, in the sad universe mostly of lies and shams and hollow phantasms, grown very ghastly now, in which, as in a safe home, we have lived this century or two? To heights and depths of social and individual divorce from delusions, of reform in right sacred earnest, of indispensable amendment and stern sorrowful abrogation in order to depart, such as cannot well be spoken at present, as dare scarcely be thought at present, which nevertheless are very inevitable, and perhaps rather imminent several of them. Truly, we have a heavy task of work before us, and there is a pressing call that we should seriously begin upon it, before it tumble into an inextricable mass, in which there will be no working, but only suffering and hopelessly perishing. And that is the end. Now, one thing that I would like to hear is someone who thinks that Moldbug is too wordy. Take on Carlyle, because that was a whole lot of words to say democracy is bullshit. And the people who are peddling this are doing it for their own self-interests. And there's people all across the country who are living in complete squalor, their lives are falling apart around them, and they're being asked to believe and to buy into this notion of democracy, of just kind of get popular opinion and then use. So that's what he's speaking to, and he's saying, in the past there was these what's being called now shams. There's no divine right to rule. There's no divine right for this ruler to rule. But he's like, they were ruling. People were doing business. They were trafficking. Everyone was trafficking in their products, and the merchants were selling stuff, and everyone was going about doing their thing. And these sorts of things were being enforced. The law was being enforced. Rulers were actually engaged in the process of ruling. Now, these people who claim to be rulers aren't ruling at all. They've built up an entire network of lies and deceit. And this whole system now is just nothing but lies. And it's not going to lead us in a good direction. That's my interpretation of basically what he was saying. This piece here, you heard Stephen and I at the beginning talking about the directions that this piece that we were thinking it went, and it was a different one. It was a different piece is what we were thinking of than this actual one here, where he gets into he has more conversations about the institution of slavery, and I think that's in the Patchwork series, which incidentally is the next one that I wanted to talk about. The Patchwork series is where he actually lays out his model for a joint stock corporation, how it would be structured, and in his imaginary land, how we would get to that point. So he's kind of like, hey, this is completely unrealistic and it's never going to happen, so don't think that I'm actually trying to make this happen. All reasonable disclaimers ahead of time, but here's how I would actually do it. It would function like this. This is how it would be built. This is the incentive structure. This is where it would be laid out. These are what certain people would be responsible for, et cetera, et cetera. So that's pretty interesting, and I think that we'll get into that. But this one, for those who don't know, who haven't read Moldbug, that's the most that he quotes Carlyle. Carlyle has extensively impacted him and his thinking, and he calls himself a Carlylean. But that's the one where he quotes him the most. Those long quotes are only in that piece. So looking through the comments here, there's some interesting stuff, and so I'll be going through and reading your comments later on afterwards. I've got to get wrapped up here because we've been going for almost 2.5 hours, and I've got some stuff I've got to do. So I appreciate you guys tuning in. I appreciate you guys listening. Once again, like, comment, subscribe, share, do all that stuff. And then another big thanks, shout out to our sponsor, Paloma Verde. Carlos has been in the chat. I see he's still there. PalomaVerdeStore.com. That's PalomaVerdestore. PalomaVerdeStore.com. Use promo code KING. That'll get you 25% off any order over $75. And also, if you sign up for their newsletter, then they'll give you an additional 10% off. So you can get 35% off your first order. It's a pretty awesome deal. We appreciate Carlos and Vanessa supporting us here. We support them in turn. And we will be back on Thursday at around 1 p.m. Pacific to do this again. Thanks again, folks. We'll talk to you next time. Oh, you can follow me on Twitter at RealKingPilled, and you can follow not Steven, but Liberal Steve at Messina Inc. And we will see you guys next time.